Daniel Carter slammed the ring down on the breakfast table so hard that his coffee cup rattled, and his 8-year-old daughter froze with her spoon halfway to her mouth. It was a ring he had never seen before in his life. A ring he had never bought. A ring that somehow ended up on his finger while he slept in his boss's lake house. And the woman standing 10 feet away, the most powerful woman he had ever worked for, was staring at it like she had just seen a ghost from her own past. How does a man wake up engaged to a woman he never proposed to? That's the question that changed everything. Drop a comment right now. Tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because this one goes places nobody saw coming. Daniel Carter had a rule he lived by. Never complicate what is already working. It was a simple rule, maybe even a boring one. But after everything he had been through, the funeral, the grief, the long nights sitting in Lily's doorway, just listening to her breathe because he was too afraid to sleep, boring felt like oxygen. He needed boring. He had built his entire life around it. He woke up at 5:15 every morning, not because an alarm told him to, but because his body had learned that 5:15 was the only window of silence he was going to get. Lily would be up by 6:30. School bags had to be packed. Lunches had to be made. Permission slips had to be signed, and usually found under the couch cushion at the last possible second. Then the 40-minute drive to the Hayes Outdoor Adventures facility on the western edge of Colorado Springs, where Daniel had worked for the last 6 years as senior maintenance supervisor. He managed a team of 11, kept 230 acres of resort equipment running through every season. Snow, rain, blistering summer heat, it didn't matter. If something broke, Daniel fixed it. If something needed to be built, Daniel built it. If the company's biggest lake resort needed a complete mechanical overhaul in the middle of January, Daniel put on his heaviest coat and got it done. That was his value, not his personality, not his looks, not his network. His ability to show up and handle what nobody else wanted to handle. And he was proud of that. Proud enough that he never complained, never asked for recognition, never pushed himself into conversations he hadn't been invited into. That last part, that was the problem. Because Daniel Carter had been invisible for 3 years, and somewhere along the way, he had started to believe that invisibility was the same thing as peace. I was in the middle of reviewing maintenance logs on his laptop when the call came in. Not a text, not an email through the company system, a direct call from her personal number. He stared at the screen for 2 full seconds before he answered. Victoria. Daniel. Her voice was controlled. It always was. But there was something underneath it today, something clipped and tight that he couldn't name. Are you available this Friday? He pulled up his schedule on the second monitor. I've got the inspection at the Breckenridge site Friday morning, but I can push it to Thursday afternoon if... I'm not talking about work. He stopped typing. That had never happened before. In 6 years, every conversation between them had been about work. Projects, timelines, budgets, personnel reviews. Even the rare moments when she lingered in the break room and they talked about something else. Whether her nephew's Little League tournament, his daughter's obsession with dinosaurs. It always circled back to work within 60 seconds. I need you at my lake house this weekend, she said. Pine Ridge, you know where it is. He did. Everyone at the company knew where it was. Victoria's private lake house, up in the San Isabel forest. She had mentioned it maybe 3 times in 6 years, always in passing, always with a tone that suggested it was the one place in her life she kept entirely to herself. Is there a problem with the property? He asked, because that was the only logical explanation. No. Structural concern. Because if the dock... Daniel. A pause. Heavy. Deliberate. It's not about the property. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. Okay, he said carefully. Then what is it about? Another pause. And then Victoria Hayes, CEO of a $40 million outdoor recreation company. A woman who had fired executives without blinking. Who had walked into a room full of hostile investors and turned every single one of them around with nothing but her words. That woman cleared her throat, like she was about to say something she had never said out loud before. "I need a favor," she said. "A personal one." He called his sister Janet that night after Lily was asleep. Janet was 3 years older, lived 40 minutes away in Pueblo, and had been his unofficial crisis consultant since the day Sarah died. She answered on the second ring. "She called you personally," Janet said. "Yes." "From her private number?" "Yes." "And asked you to come to her lake house?" "For the weekend." Silence. "Daniel, don't. I'm just saying. Don't say it. She likes you." He pressed the phone harder against his ear and walked to the kitchen window. The backyard was dark. Lily had left her bicycle leaning against the fence again, back tire halfway flat. He'd fix it in the morning. "She's my boss, Janet." "She's also a woman. She's also my boss." "You've been working for that woman for 6 years, Janet said. "You've told me exactly 4 stories about her. You know what every single one of them had in common. She noticed something nobody else noticed. About you. About your situation." A beat. "Normal bosses don't do that." He didn't answer that. Because she wasn't wrong. There was the time Lily had the flu, and Daniel came in anyway because they were 3 days from a resort opening, and he didn't have backup coverage. Victoria had seen him in the hallway at 2 in the afternoon and just said plainly, without making it a conversation, "Go home, Daniel. I'll have Martinez cover the last walkthrough." And then she walked away before he could argue. There was the time she found Lily's crayon drawing of a dinosaur on Daniel's desk. Lily had snuck it into his bag, and instead of ignoring it or making a joke, Victoria had picked it up and said, "Is this a brachiosaurus, or is the neck supposed to be that long on purpose?" And when Daniel said Lily had been on a dinosaur kick for 2 months, Victoria had spent the next 10 minutes asking questions. Real ones. Like what Lily's favorite was. Like whether she'd been to the Denver Museum of Natural History. Small things. Quiet things. But Daniel had a memory like a filing cabinet, and those things had never left it. "I don't know what she wants," he told Janet. "Are you going?" He exhaled. "I don't know that either." I went. Of course he went. He dropped Lily at Janet's Friday after school, drove 2 hours north into the mountains, and pulled up to a private gravel road, marked by a simple wooden sign that said, "Pine Ridge Private." The lake house sat back from the water, surrounded by pines so old and dense that the late afternoon light came through them in broken pieces. It was bigger than he expected, but it wasn't showy. No manicured lawn, no fountain. Just dark wood, wide windows, and a stone chimney already putting out a thin line of smoke. Victoria's black SUV was parked near the entrance. He sat in his truck for 30 seconds, running through the same calculation he'd been running for 48 hours. What is this? What does she actually want? And what happens to your job if this goes sideways? Then he got out, because Daniel Carter did not sit in trucks when there was something he needed to face. She was on the dock. Not inside the house, not waiting near the entrance. She was standing on the dock that stretched out over the lake, her hands wrapped around a mug, her back half turned toward him. She was wearing a large cream-colored sweater and dark leggings, and her hair was down, which he had never seen before. In the office it was always pinned back, controlled, professional. Down it was thick and dark, and the wind off the lake moved it sideways. He walked to the edge of the dock and stopped. "You made it," she said without turning around. "Said I would." She turned then, and the first thing he noticed, the thing that hit him before anything else, was that she looked tired. Not exhausted, but tired the way people look when they've been carrying something heavy for too long, and they've finally decided to put it down, even though they're not sure what happens to them without the weight. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Victoria." He kept his voice even. "What's going on?" She looked down at the mug in her hands, then back at him. "My family is arriving tomorrow morning." "Okay." "All of them. My mother, my brother, his wife, their 3 kids. My Aunt Rosemary, who has never once in her life kept an opinion to herself." She said that last part with something that was almost humor, but not quite. "They're staying through Sunday." "Is there something wrong, a family?" "No." She shook her head. "No emergency. My mother's birthday is Monday. They've been planning this visit for 2 months. And She stopped. Set the mug down on the dock railing. I made a mistake. He waited. I told my mother I was bringing someone. Dead silence except for the wind and the lake. Someone, he repeated. A man. Someone I was seeing. She held his gaze. She's been asking me about my personal life for the last 4 years, and last month. I got tired of deflecting, and I told her there was someone. That things were going well. That I might bring him to her birthday weekend. A beat. It seemed easier than the truth. Which is, her jaw tightened slightly, just slightly, that I have been so focused on building this company that I have not been on a single date in 3 years. And that every time I walk into a room, people look at me like I am a success story. They don't understand, because someone who looks like me isn't supposed to have what I have. And my mother looks at me with that same face, that worried, pitying face, and I just... She stopped herself, pulled back, straightened. I made a mistake, and now I need to fix it. By having me pretend to be your boyfriend. She didn't flinch. Yes. For an entire weekend. Yes. With your whole family. Yes. He turned and looked out at the lake for a long moment. It was still. The far shore was a dark line of trees going purple in the fading light. A single bird was calling somewhere in the middle of the water, a loon he thought, though he couldn't be sure. Why me? He finally asked. He heard her exhale behind him. Because you are the only person I trust enough to ask, she said. And because... She paused. Because when I thought about who I would actually want standing next to me in front of my family, you were the first person I thought of. He turned back around. She was watching him with a directness he recognized from the boardroom, that unblinking, unflinching quality she had when she had decided something and was waiting to see if the other person would meet her where she stood. I'm not going to lie to your family, he said. I'm not asking you to lie. You just told me you want me to pretend. I want you to be yourself, she said. Around them. The rest they'll fill in on their own. She hesitated. People always do. He should have said no. Every reasonable part of his brain was composing the sentence, Victoria, I respect you, but this isn't something I can do. Clean. Professional. Clear. He had the words ready. And then she said one more thing. I know what I'm asking, Daniel. And I know it puts you in an impossible position. You don't have to do this. She picked up the mug again, wrapped both hands around it. But for what it's worth, I chose you because of Lily. He went very still. Because 3 years ago, when you came back to work 4 days after your wife's funeral because you didn't have enough sick leave to cover a full week, I saw what you were carrying, and you never once complained. You never asked for sympathy. You just kept doing the work. She looked at him steadily. That's not weakness, Daniel. That's something I don't see very often. And I wanted the person next to me this weekend to be someone I actually respect. He stood there. The wind moved the pines. The loon called again. And Daniel Carter, who had made a rule about never complicating what was already working, heard himself say, What time does your family get here? Her mother arrived first. Margaret Hayes was 71 years old, small, sharp-eyed, and moved through the front door of the lake house like she owned it, which technically she had before she signed it over to Victoria 8 years ago. She had Victoria's same dark eyes but warmer, and when she saw Daniel standing in the living room, those eyes went through him like a scan. This is him, she said to Victoria. Mom, I'm just asking. She walked forward and extended her hand. Margaret Hayes. Daniel Carter. He shook it. Her grip was firm and deliberate. Victoria tells me nothing, she said, still holding his hand. So you have to tell me everything. Mom. What, I'm being friendly. She finally released his hand and looked him up and down with zero apology. You have a daughter. I do. Lily. She's 8. Good age. Margaret nodded like this was important data. Victoria mentioned her once. Said she draws dinosaurs. He glanced at Victoria, who was looking at the ceiling. She does, he said. Mostly Cretaceous period ones lately. She's going through a phase. Margaret's expression shifted slightly, just enough to tell him he'd said something right, though he wasn't sure what. "A man who knows his daughter's phases," she said. "Rare." She patted his arm once firmly and walked toward the kitchen. "I'm making coffee. Don't make faces when you drink it. I make it strong." Victoria's brother arrived an hour later. Marcus Hayes was 41, financial advisor, expensive watch, the kind of handshake that tries to tell you exactly how much he makes per year. His wife Diane was pleasant and distracted in equal measure, managing their 3 children, 8, 10, and 12, with the efficient exhaustion of someone who had long since accepted that managing children was an infinite project. Then came Aunt Rosemary. Rosemary Sullivan was 64, Victoria's mother's sister, and she announced her presence the way weather systems announce themselves. You felt the pressure change in the room before she actually walked through the door. "Where is he?" were her first words. "Hello, Rosemary," Victoria said. "Hello, yes, hello. Where is the man? I want to see him." Daniel was helping Diane get a juice box open for the youngest kid when Rosemary found him. She stopped 3 feet away and looked at him. He looked back. "Rosemary Sullivan," she said. "Daniel Carter. You work with Victoria." "I do." "You're in maintenance." "Senior supervisor, yes." She tilted her head. She could date a doctor. She could date a CEO. "Rosemary," Margaret said sharply from the kitchen. "I'm making an observation." Rosemary didn't take her eyes off Daniel. "Why maintenance?" Daniel considered his answer for 1 second. "Because things break," he said. "And someone has to know how to fix them." Rosemary stared at him. Then she made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite approval, something in between, and walked toward the coffee. Victoria appeared at his shoulder. "I'm sorry about her," she murmured. "Don't be," he said quietly. "I've had harder job interviews." Dinner was the test. Margaret cooked a real serious dinner, the kind that took 3 hours and filled the house with the smell of garlic and herbs, and something that made Daniel's stomach remind him that he hadn't eaten since noon. They sat around the long table, all 11 of them, or 9, since the 2 youngest kids ate in 3-minute bursts between running around. Marcus sat across from Daniel. For the first 20 minutes he was polite. Then, somewhere between the second course and the main, he stopped being polite. "So," Marcus said, cutting into his food without looking up. "Victoria says you've been with the company a while. 6 years. And you manage—" A pause. The pause that was doing real work. Maintenance. Equipment, facilities, resort infrastructure across 4 properties. 11-person team. "Right." Marcus nodded slowly. "Good steady work." "It is. Victoria built this company from—" He glanced at his sister. "Well, you know, from nothing practically. It's impressive what she's done." "It is," Daniel agreed. "Must be interesting," Marcus continued, "to see that up close. To be, you know," another pause, "adjacent to that kind of success." The table went slightly quiet. Not completely. Diane was asking her oldest something on the other end, but the adults near the center had gone still, in a way that meant they'd heard the word adjacent and understood exactly what weight Marcus had put on it. Victoria's expression didn't change, but her hand resting on the table between them curled slightly. Daniel put down his fork. "Adjacent," he said pleasantly. Marcus shrugged. "I just mean, Marcus." Victoria's voice was perfectly level. "I'm just making conversation." "No, it's a fair word," Daniel said. He kept his tone easy, the way you keep your voice easy when you're not angry, but you want to make sure something gets heard. "I've been adjacent to a lot of things in my life. I was adjacent to my wife's hospital room when she was dying. I was adjacent to my daughter's bedroom for about 6 months after that, because she wouldn't sleep without the door open, and I couldn't close it either." He picked up his fork again. "Adjacent's not always a small place to be." Nobody said anything. At the end of the table, Rosemary put down her wine glass. Margaret was looking at Daniel with the same scanning expression she'd had in the doorway. And Victoria was looking at him with something he couldn't fully categorize because it was too layered to name in a single word. Marcus cleared his throat. I didn't mean to. You're fine, Daniel said. And he meant it. Good food, Margaret. Margaret smiled warm and real. Strong opinions make good appetite, she said, and somehow that was enough to reset the table. After dinner, Marcus found him on the back porch. To Daniel's mild surprise, he wasn't coming to continue the argument. He was carrying 2 beers. He handed one over and leaned against the railing. That was a good answer, Marcus said. In there. Daniel took the beer. Wasn't trying to win anything. I know. Marcus was quiet for a moment, looking at the lake. I worry about her. Victoria. She's my sister. He turned his head. She puts up this wall, has for years, and every time someone gets close enough to actually see her, something goes wrong, or she finds a reason to push them out, or... He stopped. She doesn't let people take care of her, you understand. Daniel said nothing. So I watch for it, Marcus continued. Watch for the people who are with her for the right reasons. And... He exhaled. The adjacent thing was a bad word. I know it was. I was testing you. I figured. She would kill me if she knew I was out here telling you this. Probably. But I need you to understand. Marcus looked at him directly. If this is real, if you actually care about her, then don't let her push you out. She will try. She pushes everyone out eventually. A beat. Don't let her. Daniel held the beer without drinking it. The lake was black now. The stars were out in the way. They only got out this far from the city, thick, dense, almost aggressive. What makes you think I won't? He asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. Because you didn't explain yourself at dinner, he said. You just told the truth. And people who are pretending don't usually do that. He pushed off the railing. Good night, Daniel. He went inside. Daniel stayed on the porch. He stood there for a long time holding a beer. He'd barely touched, thinking about a man who had just told him not to let his sister push him out, as if he had any standing to be pushed out of in the first place. As if any of this were real. As if the line between pretending and something else hadn't just shifted in a way he was not prepared for. The family went to bed by 11. The kids first, then Margaret, then Rosemary, who paused on her way down the hall and gave Daniel one more long, measuring look before disappearing into the guest room. Diane and Marcus were next, and it was just Daniel and Victoria sitting across from each other at the kitchen table with the remains of the coffee pot between them and the house gone quiet all around them. How are you doing? She asked. Fine. That's not an answer. It's an honest one. She looked at him. Marcus got to you. Your brother loves you, Daniel said. That's not getting to me. That's just a fact. She wrapped her hands around her mug. What did he say? Nothing worth repeating. Daniel. He looked at her across the table. In the kitchen light, with her hair still down, and the controlled professional surface she usually wore fully absent, she looked like a version of herself he'd never been allowed to see before. Not worse. Not more vulnerable in a way that was sad. Just realer. Like the difference between a photograph and the actual person. He told me you push people away, Daniel said. Eventually. She didn't look away. He's not wrong. Why? She was quiet for a long moment. Because when I let someone in, she said slowly, they always want to change something. My schedule, my priorities, the way I look, the way I eat, the way I dress. She turned the mug between her palms. Every relationship I've had, there's been this moment where the person I'm with looks at me and starts doing the math. Like they're calculating what percentage of me is acceptable and what percentage needs to be adjusted. She stopped. I got tired of being a project. Daniel thought about that. Lily had a hamster, he said. Victoria blinked. What? 6 months ago. A hamster named Biscuit. She got it for her birthday. And the first 3 days all she did was try to hold it, play with it, make it do things. And Biscuit was miserable. He leaned forward slightly. Finally I told her if you want Biscuit to trust you, stop trying to make it do things. Just sit near it. Let it decide when to come to you. Victoria stared at him. That's your analogy, she said. I'm a hamster. Biscuit came to her on day 6, he said. Sat in her lap for 20 minutes. Lily cried she was so happy. A pause. And then quietly, in a way that seemed to surprise her slightly, Victoria laughed. Not a polished, controlled laugh. A real one. A short, surprised, genuine thing that transformed her face for about 3 seconds. Daniel felt something shift in his chest. Something he had been keeping very carefully in its place for a long time. "You are a strange man, Daniel Carter," she said. "So I've been told." She shook her head slowly, still smiling. "Thank you for coming. Whatever happens this weekend, thank you." "You don't have to thank me yet." "Why not?" He looked at her steadily. "Because the weekend isn't over." I was in the guest room by midnight. It was a simple room bedside table, one window that looked out at the pines. He lay on top of the covers with his boots off and stared at the ceiling. He thought about what he'd told her, what she'd told him. He thought about Lily at Janet's house, probably making Janet read 3 extra chapters of whatever they were into now. He thought about the way Marcus had looked at him on the porch. About the way Margaret had said, "rare," like it was a category she'd been watching for. About the way Victoria had laughed that one real, unguarded second. He fell asleep thinking about that laugh. And when he woke up, his hand was heavy. He stared at the ceiling first, then at the window. Gray morning light, pines, wind. Then he looked down at his hand and stopped breathing. On his ring finger, his left ring finger, sat a ring. Gold, old, set with a small dark stone surrounded by tiny diamonds. The kind of ring you'd see in a black and white photograph from 70 years ago. He sat up slowly. His heart was doing something loud and irregular. He had never seen this ring before in his life. He had absolutely, certainly, 100%, not put it on his own hand. He stared at it for a full 10 seconds. Then he stood up, walked down the hall, and knocked on Victoria's door. She opened it in 30 seconds, and the look on her face when she saw the ring told him everything and nothing at the same time. Her face went white. Not the white of shock, exactly the white of recognition. "That ring," she said. "Yes." "Where did you?" "On my hand, when I woke up." She stared at it. Her mouth opened slightly. "Daniel," she said, "that ring belonged to my grandmother." To be continued in part 2. Drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? I want to see how far this story is traveling. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe. We're just getting started, and you do not want to miss what happens next. Victoria's hand came up slowly, like she was reaching for something fragile, something she was afraid would disappear if she moved too fast. Her fingers stopped just short of touching the ring on Daniel's hand. "That's my grandmother's ring," she said again, quieter this time, like she needed to hear herself say it twice to believe it. "You said that already," Daniel said. "What I need to know is how it got on my finger." She pulled her hand back, pressed it flat against the doorframe. "I don't know. Victoria, I genuinely do not know, Daniel." Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. "That ring has been in my family for 60 years. My grandmother wore it until she passed away. My mother kept it after that. I haven't seen it in—" She stopped, looked past him toward the hallway. "Come inside. Close the door." He stepped in. She closed the door behind him, and for a moment they both just stood there, the ring sitting on his finger, like it belonged there, which it absolutely did not. "Your mother has it?" he asked. "Had it, I thought." Victoria moved to the window. "She mentioned it once 2 years ago. Said she was going to give it to whoever." She stopped herself again. "Whoever what?" Victoria turned around. Her expression was doing something complicated, cycling through things she wasn't ready to say out loud. "She said she'd give it to whoever made her feel like the family was going to be okay." Dead silence. Daniel looked down at the ring, then back up at her. "So your mother," he said slowly, "snuck into a guest room in the middle of the night and put a 60-year-old family heirloom on my finger. I know how it sounds. Victoria, I need you to tell me it sounds as insane to you as it sounds to me." "It sounds completely insane," she said. "And also," she pressed her lips together, Also very much like something my mother would do. He stared at her. She stared back. And then despite everything, despite the surreal absurdity of standing in his boss's lake house bedroom at 7 in the morning, wearing a dead woman's ring, Daniel felt the corner of his mouth pull upward. "I need coffee," he said. "Me too." "A lot of it." "The whole pot," she agreed. They went downstairs together. Margaret was already in the kitchen. Of course she was. She was standing at the stove in a pale blue robe, her hair pinned up, humming something Daniel didn't recognize. She didn't turn around when they came in. Just reached up and pulled a second mug from the cabinet, then a third, and set all three on the counter. "Good morning," she said. "Mom," Victoria said. "Coffee's hot." "Mom." Margaret turned around. Her eyes went immediately to Daniel's left hand. A small, satisfied smile moved across her face, brief and quiet, like the smile of someone who has played a long game and watched it pay off. "Do you want cream?" she asked Daniel. "I want an explanation," he said. "I'll take that as a yes." She poured the coffee, slid his mug across the counter, and then looked at him with those clear, scanning eyes. "My mother gave me that ring 52 years ago, told me to give it to someone worthy." She poured Victoria's cup. "I've been waiting a long time." "Margaret," Daniel said, keeping his voice careful and even, "I am not engaged to your daughter." "I know that. We've been very careful not to. I know that too." She picked up her own mug. "I'm 71 years old. I've been watching people pretend to be things they're not for 7 decades. You two." She glanced between them. "You're not pretending to be in a relationship. You're pretending not to be." The kitchen went completely quiet. Daniel did not look at Victoria. Victoria did not look at Daniel. Margaret drank her coffee. "The ring doesn't make you engaged," she said finally. "I'm not crazy, it's just a ring. But it's a ring that belongs with someone who sees my daughter as a person first." She set her mug down. "The way you talked about your daughter at dinner last night, the way you sat with Marcus on the porch," she paused. "The way you looked at Victoria when she wasn't looking back." Her voice softened just slightly. "That ring has been sitting in my nightstand for 12 years waiting for that look." Still nobody spoke. Then Margaret picked up her mug and walked toward the door. "Breakfast in an hour," she said. "I'm making biscuits." She left. Daniel and Victoria stood in the kitchen, 2 full coffee cups between them, the ring still on his finger and a silence that had changed shape 3 times in the last 90 seconds. "I'm sorry," Victoria said finally. "Stop apologizing." She had no right to... Victoria. He turned to face her fully. "Do you want me to take it off?" She met his eyes. He watched her struggle with it. Actually struggle in real time, the way a person struggles when what they want and what they're willing to admit they want are 2 different things. "That's not..." She stopped. Started again. "What I want isn't the point. The arrangement we agreed to..." "I'm not asking about the arrangement. I'm asking what you want." Another silence. Longer this time. "I want to get through this weekend without anyone getting hurt," she said. It wasn't the answer to the question he'd asked. They both knew it. He nodded anyway, picked up his coffee, and let her have the distance she needed. For now. Breakfast was a full production. Margaret's biscuits were serious, the kind that take real time and real butter and produce results that make people go quiet at the table out of pure respect. The kids were up early, loud running energy through the house like electricity through a circuit. Diane was managing them with impressive efficiency. Marcus came down looking like he'd slept well, which Daniel suspected was deliberate, a performance of normalcy after the conversation on the porch. And Rosemary. Rosemary came down last, sat across from Daniel, poured her own coffee, and looked at his hand. He saw the exact moment she saw the ring. Her coffee cup stopped moving. She looked up at him. He held her gaze. She looked at Victoria. Victoria was buttering a biscuit with remarkable focus. Rosemary looked at Margaret. Margaret was not looking at anyone. And then Rosemary Sullivan, a woman who had announced her arrival into every room she'd ever entered, said absolutely nothing. Just drank her coffee. But the corner of her mouth did something, a small private movement, that in a different woman might have been called a smirk. Daniel exhaled slowly through his nose. The morning moved forward. After breakfast, the kids wanted to take the kayaks out. Marcus and Diane went with them, and Margaret announced she needed to rest before lunch, which Daniel suspected was less about rest and more about strategic withdrawal. Rosemary disappeared with a book and what was clearly a plan to be found in an important location later. That left Daniel and Victoria on the dock. They were quiet for a while. The comfortable kind of quiet which surprised him because it should not have been comfortable. The situation was objectively complicated. The ring was still on his hand. Her mother had just delivered a very clear message that neither of them had fully responded to. But the quiet held. Finally, Victoria spoke. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Okay. About why I really chose you." She kept her gaze on the water. "I told you it was because I trust you. That's true. But it's not the whole truth." He waited. 18 months ago, she said. I was close to losing the company. Not publicly, nobody knew except my CFO and the bank. We'd overextended on the Telluride property, and the winter season had been brutal, and I had 2 investors threatening to pull out simultaneously. She paused. "You remember the Telluride mechanical failure, the ski lift systems?" "January," he said. "The gearbox issue. You drove up there in a blizzard, at 2 in the morning, alone because you said the repair crew couldn't be there until 8, and you weren't willing to let the resort open without a full safety check. The gearbox was cracked. It was a liability issue. It was more than a liability issue." She turned her head. "One of those investors was at Telluride that weekend. He saw the resort open on time, fully operational after a complete mechanical failure the night before. He called my CFO, said whatever team I had running operations was the most reliable he'd ever seen." She looked at him steadily. "He didn't pull out, and the second investor followed his lead." Daniel was quiet. "I never told you that," she said. "No, because I didn't know how to." She looked back at the water. "Because telling you that would have meant telling you that you saved something. I'd spent 15 years building, and that I didn't even know it was being saved until 3 months later when my CFO told me the full story." Her voice was controlled, but barely. And by then, it felt too late to say it correctly. He sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "You could have just said thank you." She let out a short breath. "I know. That's all it would have taken." "I know, Daniel." He looked at her profile. The jaw she kept tight when things mattered. The hands she kept folded when she was working to stay composed. He'd been looking at this woman across desks and conference tables and maintenance reports for 6 years, and he had never been this close to actually seeing her. "Thank you," she said, quietly, without looking at him. "For the gearbox. For the blizzard. For—" She stopped. "For this weekend." "You're not done thanking me yet," he said. "Weekend's not over." She almost smiled. He almost reached across and closed the space between their hands, which were resting 2 inches apart on the dock railing. He didn't. But the 2 inches felt smaller than they had an hour ago. Lunch brought the storm, not a weather system. Though the clouds were building to the west in a way Daniel recognized, but a storm named Philip Garrett, who arrived at the lake house at 12:15, driving a silver luxury sedan that was absolutely inappropriate for a mountain gravel road, and who walked through the front door without knocking. Vic. He said it like a name and a statement simultaneously. Victoria went still. She was standing near the kitchen, a glass of water in her hand, and when Philip Garrett walked in, every carefully maintained composure she had built over 36 hours compressed itself into a single point. Her expression didn't change. But Daniel, standing 10 feet away, saw her hand tighten on the glass. "Philip," she said, "didn't know I was coming." He smiled. The kind of smile that arrives already confident about its own reception. He was early 50s, silver at the temples, the tailored jacket of a man who understood that presentation was its own form of argument. "Your mother invited me." Margaret appeared from the hallway. "Philip is an old family friend," she said pleasantly. Victoria's voice stayed perfectly even. "Is he? We hadn't seen him in years." Margaret moved toward the kitchen. I'll set another place. Philip was looking at Daniel now. A slow, evaluating look that moved from his work boots to his face and didn't bother being subtle about the journey. And you are, he asked. Daniel Carter. He didn't extend his hand. Daniel works with Victoria, Philip said, as if he already knew this, as if he'd been briefed before he walked in. With her, Daniel said. Not for her. A fractional pause. Right. Philip turned back to Victoria. You look well. The company's doing well. Very. I heard about the Telluride property. Impressive recovery. Thank you. Listen. He lowered his voice, though not enough, moving slightly closer to her. I know this weekend was supposed to be family. I should have called ahead. But your mother mentioned you had someone. His eyes moved to Daniel again. I wanted to meet him. Now you have, Victoria said. He's in maintenance. The word landed differently from Philip's mouth than it had from Marcus's. Marcus had used it as a test. Philip was using it as a dismissal. Daniel felt something shift in him, not anger exactly. Anger was too hot, too reactive. This was something cooler, more deliberate. That's right, Daniel said from across the room. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved. I keep things running. Philip glanced at him. Important work. It is. Victoria's always had good. He searched for the word. Support staff. The kitchen went quiet. Marcus and Diane were in the doorway now. Rosemary had materialized from somewhere positioned at the kitchen table, like she'd reserved her seat for exactly this moment. Victoria set her water glass down. When she spoke, her voice was the boardroom voice. The one that didn't rise, didn't fall, didn't negotiate. Daniel is not my support staff, Philip. He is the reason my Telluride property stayed open through the worst mechanical failure I've had in 15 years. He is the reason I didn't lose two of my largest investors in the same quarter. A beat. And he is here this weekend because I asked him to be. Not because of his title, because of who he is. Philip blinked. It was a small blink, a recalibration. I didn't mean to suggest, I know exactly what you meant. Victoria picked up her glass. I've been listening to what people mean for 38 years. She looked at him levelly. Lunch is in 20 minutes. She walked out of the kitchen. Daniel watched Philip track her exit. Then Philip looked at Daniel. Daniel looked back. She's impressive, Philip said, and this time there was something genuine in it underneath the layered performance. Always has been. Yeah, Daniel said. She is. Rosemary reached for the breadbasket on the table. Sit down, Philip, she said without looking up. You've already made enough of an entrance. Lunch was tense in the specific way that only happens when people are being aggressively normal to avoid acknowledging what just happened. The kids helped because children have no investment in controlled atmospheres and simply dissolved the tension through sheer velocity, running, interrupting, demanding, existing at a frequency that made sustained adult iciness structurally impossible. Philip was charming at lunch. Daniel had to give him that. How was attentive to Margaret, patient with the kids made. Marcus laughed twice. He was performing clearly. Daniel had enough experience watching people manage rooms to recognize the technique. But the performance was practiced enough to be functional. What Philip kept doing, though subtle, consistent, probably unconscious, was finding small ways to position himself and Victoria as a unit. We saw this film last year. Remember that conference in Denver, Vic? Your mother and I always agreed on that. Victoria answered each one with the minimum number of words that social courtesy required. Daniel said nothing, ate his lunch, let it happen, until dessert. Margaret brought out a pie Real made that morning. The kitchen had smelled like it all day. And while she was cutting slices, Philip leaned back in his chair and looked at Victoria with the ease of a man who had decided the ground was shifting in his favor. You know, he said, I've been thinking about the consortium proposal, the resort acquisition in New Mexico. He glanced at Daniel, then back at Victoria. We should talk about it this weekend, actually. Fresh eyes, right people in the room, Victoria said. This is a family weekend, Philip. Of course, I just meant... I know what you meant. I think Daniel might find it interesting even, given his operational background. Philip. Victoria set down her fork. Clean. Final. I am not discussing business this weekend. Not with you. Not with anyone. Her voice was entirely calm. If you have a proposal, send it to my CFO on Monday. The table was quiet. Philip smiled. Smooth, adaptive. Of course. But Daniel saw the look that moved across his face in the half-second before the smile arrived. A tightening. A recalculation. The look of a man who had come to this lake house with a specific expectation and was being forced to revise it in real time. And Daniel understood in that moment what Philip Garrett actually was. Not just a family friend, not just an old acquaintance. How was someone who had been waiting for Victoria to be without someone? And someone had told him, maybe inadvertently, maybe not, that her relationship was new and uncertain. And he had driven up a gravel mountain road in an inappropriate luxury sedan because he thought this weekend was an opportunity. After lunch, Philip found Daniel near the coat hooks by the back door. Walk, Philip said. Daniel looked at him for a moment, reading the request. Sure. They went out the back, away from the dock, toward the tree line, where a narrow footpath ran along the edge of the property. The clouds were closer now, the air colder. She's protecting you, Philip said. I know. She does that. With people she trusts. He kept his voice conversational. Easy. Has she told you about the company, the real story, not the press version? Some of it. She built it alone, from nothing. After her first business partner took half her starting capital and disappeared. A sideways glance. You knew that. Daniel hadn't. He filed it away without showing anything. The point is, Philip continued, she's been alone a long time, and she's good at alone, but alone isn't, he paused, choosing his word, sustainable. A woman with what she's built, what she carries, she needs someone who understands that world. You mean someone like you? I mean someone who can meet her where she is. Daniel stopped walking. Philip stopped too. I'm going to say this once, Daniel said, without heat, without performance. Just plainly. Victoria knows where she is. She doesn't need someone to meet her there. She needs someone who doesn't try to move her from it. Philip looked at him. Maintenance, he said. Not cruelly. Almost thoughtfully. Every day, Daniel said. They walked back in silence. By mid-afternoon, the storm had arrived. Real weather this time. The clouds, Daniel had been watching since morning, had finally organized themselves into something serious. Rain against the windows whined off the lake, the temperature dropping fast enough that Margaret sent the kids upstairs with board games and made a fire in the main room. Philip announced he'd be staying the night, road conditions, mountain safety. Margaret agreed immediately. Victoria said nothing. That evening settled into a different shape than the night before. Quieter. The fire did most of the work, and people arranged themselves around it in the natural gravitational way that happens in bad weather when the outside world removes the option of leaving and you discover who you actually want to be near. The kids fell asleep on the floor. Marcus carried them upstairs one at a time. Diane followed. Margaret retired early with a book. Rosemary fell asleep in her chair, which she would deny later. That left Daniel, Victoria, and Philip. For 45 minutes. Philip made the conversation last. He was good at it, filling space with substance, keeping it interesting enough that withdrawal felt rude. He talked about the New Mexico property with enough detail to make it genuinely engaging. He talked about the industry, about what was coming, about shifts in the outdoor recreation market that Daniel actually found interesting despite himself. But eventually the wine ran low and the fire burned down, and there was a natural pause, and Philip looked at it and, to his credit, recognized it. He stood. I should let you two... A slight pause. A smile that was almost real. Good night. He went upstairs. The fire popped once. The rain was steady against the windows. Victoria was sitting on one end of the couch, and Daniel was on the other, and the space between them was smaller than it had been that morning on the dock, which had been smaller than it had been at breakfast. He's not going to stop, Victoria said. No. He'll bring the New Mexico proposal to my CFO on Monday and route it in a way that makes it look like I agreed to take the meeting. She turned her glass slowly. He does things like that. Makes assumptions that create situations. What are you going to do? She was quiet for a long moment. I've been doing one thing for 15 years, she said. Build the company, protect the company, make every decision through the lens of the company. She stared at the fire. And it's worked. Objectively. Every metric says it's worked. But, he said. She turned her head. There was a but at the end of that sentence, he said. She held his gaze. But I'm tired, she said simply. I'm tired of every room I walk into being a negotiation. I'm tired of people looking at me and seeing an acquisition target or a charity case or a project or a... She stopped. Started again. I'm tired of sitting across from a man who drove up here in a $40,000 car to remind me what I'm worth in his world. Then don't let him define the terms. I don't. You're letting him set the conversation right now. She stiffened slightly. You're explaining yourself to me about a man who doesn't matter. He kept his voice quiet. You don't need to do that. Not with me. The rain shifted, moving harder for a moment, then settling back. Victoria looked at her hands. Then she said, My first business partner. Did Philip tell you about him? Daniel hesitated, then nodded. She didn't look surprised. What did he say? That he took half your capital. He did. His name was Greg Aiken. We were 24. I had 3 investors and a lease on a small property in Vale. He had the charm and the connections, and I had the operational brain, and we thought that was a perfect split. She exhaled. He took the investor relationships, built them into his own network. When he left, he took 2 of the 3 investors with him. What did you do? I cried for about 2 days, she said without any apology. And then I called the 3rd investor myself, told her exactly what had happened and exactly what I planned to do about it, and asked her for 30 days to prove the operation could hold. A small pause. She gave me 60. And she's still with us. Who is she? Eleanor Marsh. Something warm moved across Victoria's face. She's 77 now. Still reads every quarterly report. Sends me a handwritten note when she has questions. She smiled for a moment. She told me once that she stayed because I didn't blame Greg for what happened. I just told her what I was going to do next. That's you, Daniel said. She looked at him. You don't spend a lot of time on blame, he said. I've worked for you 6 years. I've watched you handle problems. You don't look backward. She was quiet. It's one of the things He stopped himself. She waited. Respect, he said. About how you work. The pause after the word was a half-second too long, and they both heard what he hadn't said in the space before he landed on respect, and neither of them addressed it directly because the evening had already carried more weight than either of them had planned to hold. I should sleep, she said. Yeah. She stood, looked down at him for a moment. Daniel. Yeah. I don't think this is pretend anymore. She said it simply, without drama. And then she walked upstairs before he could answer. He sat there for a long time after that. The fire burned to coals. The rain kept on. And Daniel Carter sitting in his boss's lake house at nearly 1 a.m, wearing a ring he'd never bought on a finger. He'd never expected anyone to notice thought about a woman who had just told him the truth and walked away before she could hear what the truth meant to him. He thought about calling Janet. Then he thought about what Janet would say. Then he just sat there. Outside the storm was peaking, the kind of mountain storm that comes in hard and burns out fast. And somewhere between the sound of the rain and the last light of the dying fire, Daniel made a decision. Not about the weekend. Not about the arrangement they'd agreed to. About himself. He had been invisible for 3 years. By choice. By necessity. By grief that had slowly calcified into habit. And he had just spent a day and a half with a woman who had looked directly at him, not at his job title, not at his loss, not at his role in her company, and said, I see you. He wasn't ready to be invisible anymore. He went upstairs. He passed Philip's door without slowing down. He went into the guest room, lay down on the bed, and for the first time in a long time, fell asleep without cataloging everything that could go wrong. The ring on his hand was warm. He didn't take it off. He woke up at 5:45. Not because of an alarm, not because of the storm which had burned itself out somewhere around 3 in the morning and left everything outside muffled and still. He woke up because a door closed down the hall, soft, careful, the kind of close that is trying not to be heard, and Daniel Carter had spent 3 years sleeping light enough to hear his daughter breathe through 2 walls, so a careful door was practically a shout. He lay still for a moment, listened. Footsteps. Measured. Moving toward the stairs. He sat up. The ring was still on his finger. He had a half-second every morning now apparently where he forgot about it, and then he looked down, and the whole weight of the last 48 hours landed on him at once. He pulled on his jeans, his flannel shirt, his boots unlaced, and went into the hall. Philip Garrett was at the top of the stairs. He was fully dressed, jacket on, car keys in his hand, and in his other hand, held loosely, deliberately, casually, was his phone. And on that phone screen, visible for the 3 seconds it took Daniel to register the scene, was what looked like a photograph of Victoria's desk, in the study off the main room. Daniel had seen her working there last night after everyone went to bed. Papers, folders, the kind of thing a person leaves out when they think the house is asleep. Philip saw Daniel at the same moment Daniel saw the phone. For 2 seconds, neither of them moved. Then Philip smiled. Easy, practiced, completely unbothered. Early riser, he said. Put it back, Daniel said. I'm sorry. Whatever you photographed on her desk. His voice was low and completely level. Put it back. Delete what you took. And then get in your car. Philip's smile held, but something behind it shifted. A recalculation. I don't know what you think I think I watched you come out of the study with your phone open and a photograph on the screen. Daniel stepped closer, not aggressive, just present, just removing the comfortable distance Philip had been operating in. I think you came up here this weekend because someone told you she was in a new uncertain relationship and you saw an opening. I think you spent yesterday establishing yourself as the better option in front of her family. And I think you just tried to take something from her desk that you have no right to. Philip's jaw tightened. You're in maintenance, he said. And this time it wasn't thoughtful. It was a blade. I am, Daniel said. And I know exactly what it looks like when someone's trying to take a system apart from the inside. He held out his hand. The phone, Philip. A long silence. The house was completely quiet. Somewhere downstairs the refrigerator hummed. Philip looked at the outstretched hand. Then at Daniel's face. Then he made the calculation that Daniel had been waiting for him to make, the one where he weighed the cost of escalating against the cost of backing down, and realized that neither option looked good, but one of them looked worse. He opened the photo, deleted it, turned the screen toward Daniel to show the empty camera roll. Smart man, Daniel said quietly. Philip put the phone in his pocket. She's going to outgrow you, he said. You know that. Daniel said. But that's her call, not yours. Philip went downstairs. 30 seconds later, the front door opened and closed. The silver sedan started up, crunched out on the gravel. Gone. Daniel stood at the top of the stairs and breathed. Then he went down to the study. Victoria's desk was where she'd left it, papers stacked, a folder open, her reading glasses folded on atop. He didn't touch anything. Just stood in the doorway long enough to confirm that whatever Philip had photographed, the physical documents were intact. He went to the kitchen and made coffee. By the time the pot finished, Margaret was in the doorway. She looked at him, looked at the 2 cups he'd already set out. He left, she said. Yes. Did you? Everything's fine. She was quiet for a moment. Then she crossed to the counter, picked up her cup and said, I owe you an apology. He looked up. I invited him, she said. I thought, she stopped. This was a woman who chose words carefully, and she was choosing now. I thought seeing him would help her, remind her of the kind of world she'd built herself into. The connections, She shook her head. I was wrong. I saw it at lunch yesterday and I still didn't fix it. Why did you think she needed reminding? Margaret wrapped both hands around her mug. Because she works so hard to belong to that world that she sometimes forgets she already does. She looked at him. But you don't remind her of that world. No, he agreed. You remind her of something else. He didn't ask what. She didn't say. They drank their coffee in the early morning quiet, and Daniel thought about Philip's car on the gravel road, and the photograph that no longer existed, and the ring that still did, and the woman upstairs who didn't know any of it yet. Victoria came downstairs at 7:15. She saw Philip's empty hook by the door immediately. Looked at Daniel. He was at the kitchen table with his second cup and the previous day's newspaper that someone had left folded on the counter. He left, she said. Road's clear this morning. She looked at him for a moment. Then she came and sat across from him and poured herself a cup from the pot he'd kept warm. What happened? She said. Nothing that needs to happen again. Daniel. He looked up from the newspaper. She was watching him with that direct, unblinking quality she had, the one that didn't ask twice, didn't negotiate with deflection, just waited for the real answer. How was in your study? Daniel said. Early this morning, had a photograph on his phone. Her expression didn't collapse. It contracted a tightening from the outside in like something being compressed rather than broken. The acquisition file, she said quietly. I didn't see what it was. The New Mexico Consortium folder. I was reviewing it last night. She set her cup down. That's been in discussion for 4 months. Highly confidential. If he got that to the right people. He deleted it. She went still. I asked him to. A silence. She stopped. He just deleted it. People make better decisions when they're standing at the top of a staircase at 6 in the morning, and the alternative is a conversation they don't want to have. He turned a page of the newspaper. He's gone. The file is intact. It's over. Victoria stared at him. He didn't look up from the newspaper, which he was not actually reading. Daniel, she said. Yeah, look at me. He looked up. She was sitting across from him with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before. Not the boardroom composure. Not the careful, managed warmth she gave her family. Not the tiredness from last night, or the honesty, or even the almost smile. This was something rawer. Thank you, she said. And the way she said it, those 2 words, no qualifier, no deflection, no pivot to the practical implications, hit him somewhere behind his sternum and stayed there. You're welcome, he said. She nodded once, picked up her cup, and they sat in the kitchen together while the house woke up around them, and it was the most normal and the most complicated morning he'd had in 3 years. Rosemary found out at breakfast. Not about Philip, not specifically, but she'd heard the car at 6, and she had the pattern recognition of a woman who had watched families navigate crises for 6 decades, and she sat down at the table and looked at the empty chair and then at Daniel and said, "Good," and poured herself orange juice. Marcus noticed the chair too. He looked at Daniel across the table with the same measuring look he'd had on the porch 2 nights ago. Daniel gave him a small nod. Marcus gave one back. That was the whole conversation. The kids didn't notice at all. The kids were exclusively focused on whether they could have a second biscuit and whether the kayaks were still an option after the storm, which they were. So by 9:30, the back deck was loud with life jackets and argument, and Diane's cheerful, tireless management and the adult weight of the morning redistributed itself into something more breathable. Margaret pulled Daniel aside after breakfast. She had a small cloth bag in her hand. She held it out to him. I want you to have this, she said. He took it. It was light. He opened it and found a photograph, old black and white, slightly worn at the edges. A woman in a garden, laughing at something off camera, wearing the ring that was currently on Daniel's finger. My mother, Margaret said. 1961. That was the year she met my father. She nodded at the photograph. He said the first thing she did when she laughed was forget to be careful. Daniel looked at the photograph for a long time. Keep it, Margaret said. So you know what that ring carries. He folded the cloth carefully back around the photograph, put it in his shirt pocket. I'll take care of it, he said. I know you will, she said. That's why I'm giving it to you. She went inside. Daniel stood on the deck and touched the shirt pocket once briefly, and thought about 61 years of a ring moving through a family, and how strange it was to be the person holding it now, and how much stranger it was that it didn't feel strange at all. At 11 o'clock, Victoria's phone rang. He heard it from the living room, a sharp single ring, and then her voice dropping in a way that meant the call was serious. He didn't move toward it. Went to help Marcus with a kayak strap that was misbehaving near the dock. Victoria appeared at the back door 12 minutes later. Her face had changed. Not broken, she didn't break, he understood that now. But the compression was back, that inward tightening, and there was something underneath it that was working hard to stay underneath. "I need to make another call," she said to Marcus, who nodded, and then she looked at Daniel. "Can you?" "Go," he said. She went inside. He spent the next 20 minutes helping Marcus get all 3 kids sorted on kayaks, which required more logistical negotiation than some of the resort projects Daniel had managed professionally. Marcus was good at it, patient in the specific, easy way of a man who had accepted that this was his life and found real satisfaction in it. When the kids were on the water with Diane watching from the dock, Marcus came and stood next to Daniel. "She's going to need you today," Marcus said. "Not a question." "What do you know?" "Nothing specific. I heard her on the phone once last year when something went wrong with one of the properties. She sounds like that when things are falling sideways." He paused. "She won't ask for help. She'll manage it alone and tell you later. Don't let her." Daniel looked at him. "You give a lot of advice for someone who claims he's just watching out for his sister." "I am watching out for her," Marcus said. "The advice is free." Victoria was in the study when Daniel found her. She was standing behind the desk, not sitting, standing with the phone in her hand and 3 open folders in front of her, and an expression that was doing the compression thing so hard it had gone still. He came in, closed the door. She looked up. "The New Mexico Consortium," she said. "Someone contacted my CFO this morning. Anonymous tip. Said there was a competing bid being assembled using proprietary information from inside the negotiation." Daniel felt the pieces land. "Philip," he said, "I can't prove it yet, but the timing—" Her jaw was tight. "The information in that file is specific enough that if it reaches the right people before we close the deal, we lose the property entirely. 15 months of work, a $12 million investment position." "How long do you have?" "The consortium meeting is Thursday. Today is Sunday." She looked at him. 4 days. "What do you need?" She stopped. "What do you need?" he said again. "Specifically, right now. What's the first thing?" She blinked, like the question was in a language she understood but wasn't used to hearing. "I need to know how the information got out," she said slowly. "If it wasn't the photograph, if he had access earlier, some other way. Who else has that file?" "My CFO, my attorney, the lead investor." She paused. "And Eleanor?" "Eleanor Marsh." She looked at him. "How do you know that name? You told me about her last night." He held her gaze. "Call her." "Eleanor is 77. You said she reads every quarterly report. You said she sent handwritten notes." He kept his voice even but direct. "Call her. Not because you think she leaked it. Because she's been in this industry longer than anyone, and she will know who to call and what to say and how to do it in 4 days." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the phone and dialed. He listened to her talk to Eleanor Marsh for 6 minutes. The transformation was immediate, not exactly, but different, more real. The way she'd been with her mother, with Margaret, with him at 2 in the morning by the dying fire. The managed surface dropped away, and what remained was a woman who was sharp and afraid, and absolutely refusing to surrender to either. Eleanor said something that made Victoria exhale through her nose, not quite a laugh, but close. "Yes," Victoria said. I know Eleanor." A pause. "He's here, actually." She glanced at Daniel. "A man I trust." Another pause. "Yes." Something that was almost a smile. "I'll tell him you said so." She hung up. "She says to tell you that any man who gets up at 6 in the morning to protect someone else's work is the right kind of man." Daniel stared at her. "How does she—" Eleanor, Victoria said simply, "knows things." He decided not to pursue that. "She's calling Robert Haynes," Victoria continued. He's the consortium lead. She's known him 30 years. She can get us an emergency call this afternoon and reframe the narrative before whoever's feeding him bad information gets there first. Good. And I need to call my attorney. She was already moving, pulling up contacts. And my CFO. She stopped, looked at him. You should be with your daughter. It's Sunday. You drove 2 hours up here for a favor that turned into Victoria. You've done more than Victoria. He stepped around the desk, stopped close enough that she had to actually look at him and not at the phone. I am exactly where I want to be. Call your attorney. She looked at him. The compression was still there, the tightening the machine of her working full speed. But while she worked, he didn't interrupt, didn't offer opinions she hadn't asked for, just stayed. The calls took 90 minutes. By the end, Eleanor Marsh had reached Robert Haynes. The consortium call was scheduled for Tuesday. Victoria's attorney had sent a formal document preservation notice that would make Philip Garrett's position extremely uncomfortable if he had in fact used proprietary information. And Victoria's CFO, a competent and loyal woman named Sandra Park, had started tracing the information chain from the inside. Victoria set down the phone. She looked at her coffee cup. She looked at Daniel. I hate this, she said. I know. I hate that he came here. I hate that my mother invited him. I hated that someone I've known since I was 25 would walk into my home and... She stopped. Her hands were flat on the desk. I trusted this weekend to be... She stopped again. What? He said quietly. She looked up at him. Real, she said. I wanted this weekend to be real, not business, not performance, not negotiation. Her voice was completely steady, which somehow made it hit harder. And he turned it back into all of those things. He tried to, Daniel said. He didn't. She shook her head slightly. Everything we've talked about this weekend is real, he said. Nothing that happened in the last 2 hours changes last night. Nothing that happened this morning changes the doc yesterday, or dinner Friday. He held her gaze. He can't retroactively make something real into something fake. That's not how it works. She was very still. I don't know what this is, she said. And she meant it not as a deflection, but as an admission, the honest version of not knowing, the kind that takes courage to say out loud. You work for me. I invited you here under false pretenses. My mother put a ring on your finger. A man just tried to steal proprietary files and you handled it before I even knew about it. She exhaled. I don't know what to do with any of that. You don't have to do anything with it, he said. Right now. But eventually is not today. He leaned forward slightly. Today you have a consortium call to prepare for. Tuesday, you have the call itself. Thursday, you close the deal. He looked at her steadily. You can figure out the rest after Thursday. She searched his face for something. He let her look. And you, she said. What do you do after Thursday? Go to work Monday, he said. Fix whatever broke over the weekend. A pause. Same as always. Something moved through her eyes. Not hurt exactly, but close. I don't want same as always, she said. The words landed in the room and sat there. Neither of them moved. The house was making its normal sounds around them. Kids distantly audible from somewhere, the clock in the hallway, the refrigerator, hum. Neither do I, Daniel said. The door opened. Margaret stood in the doorway holding a plate with 2 sandwiches on it, wearing an expression of determined maternal neutrality. Lunch, she said. Eat. She set the plate on the edge of the desk and walked out without a word. They both looked at the sandwiches, then at each other. And something cracked open between them that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite relief, but was some necessary combination of both, and the tension that had been running through the room since the phone call shifted into something livable. Your mother, Daniel said. I know, Victoria said. She does that at exactly the right moment. Every time, Victoria agreed. It's genuinely unnerving. They ate lunch at the desk. Victoria walked him through the consortium deal while they ate, not because she needed to, but because once she started talking about it, He could see it was the thing that steadied her. The work, the concrete reality of something she'd built with her own hands over 15 months. He listened with full attention. Asked 3 questions. She answered them with the precision of someone who had every detail memorized, and the passion of someone who had made herself believe in the project enough to make others believe in it too. She was brilliant at it. He had known that, had seen pieces of it proximate evidence of it over 6 years, but sitting across from her while she talked through the strategic architecture of a $12 million acquisition, like it was a living thing she'd been tending. He understood for the first time the full scale of what she carried and how she carried it, and how alone she had been doing it. "You should be in that consortium call Tuesday," she said suddenly. He looked up. "I'm in maintenance, remember. You saved the Telluride property. You understand operations on a level my attorney doesn't, and my CFO only partially does." She held his gaze. "I want you there." "Victoria." "Not as my..." She gestured slightly, a gesture that encompassed the ring and the weekend and everything they hadn't named yet. "As someone who understands what I've built. What we almost lost this morning." She paused. "Will you be there?" I thought about the 11-person team, the maintenance logs, the inspection he'd rescheduled for Thursday afternoon. He thought about driving home tomorrow and going back to the clean, simple rule he'd lived by for 3 years. Never complicate what is already working. The thing was, this was already working. Whatever this was, in this study, in this lake house with this woman who had just asked him to stand in a room with investors because she trusted his judgment, this was already working. He had just been slow to admit it. "I'll be there," he said. Margaret's birthday dinner was Sunday evening. The whole family gathered, and it was a real gathering. The kind of meal that has nothing to do with performance or management, where the food is good, and the wine is poured without anyone counting, and the kids stay up too late because nobody has the heart to enforce bedtime on someone's birthday. Marcus gave a toast that was genuinely funny. Diane made a cake that the youngest had helped decorate, which explained why the frosting had dinosaurs on it. When Rosemary noticed the dinosaurs, she looked across the table at Daniel. "Your daughter's influence," she said. "I called Janet this afternoon," he said. "Lily said Margaret needed dinosaurs because dinosaurs are for people who are serious but also secretly fun." The table went quiet for a second. Then Margaret put both hands flat on the table and laughed, the real full-body version, the kind that transforms a face, and said, "That child is right." Rosemary leaned over to Daniel and said quietly, "Bring that little girl next time." He looked at her. "I mean it," Rosemary said. "I want to meet the child who knows that about people." He thought about Lily at Janet's house, probably teaching the hamster new things nobody had asked for. "I'll tell her you said so," he said. Rosemary patted his hand once firmly and went back to her wine. Victoria was watching from across the table. When he glanced at her, she looked down at her plate. But before she did, he caught the edge of something, an expression he couldn't fully name, the kind that lives in the space between wanting something and being willing to say so. He recognized it because he'd been wearing it for 48 hours. After dinner, after the kids were herded to bed and the dishes were done, and Margaret was installed in her chair with the contentment of a woman who has had exactly the birthday she needed, the family settled into the easy, unstructured wind-down of an evening almost over. Marcus fell asleep in his chair. Diane and Rosemary were talking quietly at the other end of the room. Margaret caught Daniel's eye from across the room. She looked at Victoria, who was standing near the window with her back half turned, looking at something outside in the dark. Then she looked back at Daniel. And she tilted her head. Just slightly. The way a woman tilts her head when she is pointing at something without using her hands. He looked at Victoria. He stood up. He crossed the room. He stopped beside her at the window. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said. "Good birthday dinner." It was. She was quiet for a moment. Lily would have liked it. The sentence landed softly and completely. "She would have," he said. "She would have interrogated your mother about every dish on the table and then fallen asleep under it." Victoria smiled. "Under the table." "She does that. When she's overwhelmed in a good way, she goes under the table. We don't fight it anymore." Victoria turned her head and looked at him. I want to meet her. He held her gaze. I want to meet her properly, she said. Not as your boss, not as another gesture that covered the weekend. As someone who matters. She'd want to tell you about the Cretaceous period. I'll take notes. It's an hour minimum. She has a chart. I have time, Victoria said. And the way she said it, steady, clear, without deflection, told him she meant something larger than the sentence. He looked at her for a long moment. The ring was still on his finger. He looked down at it. Then he reached up and carefully, slowly slid it off. Victoria went still. He held it out to her. It sat in his palm between them. Not because I want to give it back, he said. Because if this is going somewhere real, I don't want to get there wearing something that arrived by accident. She looked at the ring in his palm, then at him. And when we get there, she said. I'll find my own ring, he said. The right one, at the right time. Her jaw moved, just slightly. The thing that happened when she was working hard not to be moved and losing the fight. She reached out and took the ring, closed her fist around it. Okay, she said. Just that. But the way she said it was not small at all. Across the room, Rosemary caught Margaret's eye. Margaret smiled into her birthday wine. Outside the mountains were dark, and the stars were out, and the lake was still, and inside the lake house at Pine Ridge, something that had started as a favor was now something that had no clean name yet and did not need one. Some things earn their names later. He drove home Monday morning with the windows down and Lily's empty car seat in the back and a photograph of a woman in a garden folded in his shirt pocket. Janet had texted at 7:15. Lily wants pancakes before you pick her up. She says you owe her for missing Saturday movie night. He texted back. Tell her I'll make them from scratch. Janet's reply came in 4 seconds. She says frozen ones are fine. She just wants you to know she noticed. He drove the 40 minutes to Pueblo with that sitting in his chest, that particular ache that belonged exclusively to parents who understood that children notice everything and file everything and present the invoice at the exact moment you think you've gotten away with something. He pulled up to Janet's house at 8:40. Lily was on the front steps with a book and a look that said she had rehearsed exactly how unconcerned she was going to appear. He got out of the truck. She looked up from the book. You're late. 8:40 is not late. You said 8:30. I said around 8:30. Around means 30. She closed the book, stood up. Did you have a good trip? I did. Janet says you were at your boss's house. I was. Lily considered this with the gravity of an 8-year-old who had inherited her father's filing cabinet memory. The one who asked about my dinosaur drawing. He stopped. She told you about that. She didn't. You did. Last year. You said your boss picked up my drawing and asked if I did it on purpose. Lily tilted her head. I did do it on purpose. I know, Bug. The neck on a brachiosaurus is actually supposed to be that long. I know. She looked at him for another moment with those dark, serious eyes that sometimes made him feel like he was being assessed by someone much older than 8. Then she walked down the steps and put her arms around his waist and pressed her face into his jacket. He held her. I missed you, she said into the jacket. I missed you more, he said. That's mathematically impossible, she said. You were busy. He kissed the top of her head and didn't argue. They drove home. He made pancakes from scratch. She ate 3 and told him everything that had happened at Janet's, in the same way she always told him everything, in a non-linear thematically organized sequence that jumped between events according to emotional significance rather than chronology. The hamster had done something impressive. Janet had made her eat salad. There was a disagreement about what counted as a vegetable. He listened to all of it. And when she finally ran down, when she was scraping the last of the syrup off her plate, and the house had settled into its normal Sunday afternoon shape, she said without looking up, Are you going to see her again? He paused. See who? Lily looked up at him. He had raised her to know when a question was already answered, so he had only himself to blame. Yes, he said. I think so. She nodded once. Like this confirmed a calculation she'd already done. Is she nice? She is. Does she know about me? She does. Another nod. She put the plate in the sink, which she did without being asked, which never stopped surprising him, and said, "Okay, you can like her." He stood at the kitchen counter and felt the full specific weight of being a single father whose 8-year-old just gave him permission to move forward. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," she said without irony. "Can I watch a dinosaur documentary? 1 episode." 2. 1.5. "Deal," she said, and was gone. He stood there alone in the kitchen for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and sent Victoria a single text, "Home safe." Lily approved. The reply came 40 seconds later. "Tell her the Brachiosaurus neck was intentional, and she was right." He smiled. He set the phone down. I went and watched 1.5 episodes of a dinosaur documentary with his daughter, and for the first time in 3 years, the evening felt like something he was living in rather than just moving through. Tuesday came fast. The consortium call was at 2 o'clock. Victoria had sent him a full briefing document Monday afternoon, 12 pages tabbed with a section at the back she'd labeled Operational Questions, Your Territory. He'd read it twice on Monday night after Lily was asleep, and once more Tuesday morning over coffee, making margin notes, the way he marked up maintenance reports, specific, factual, direct. How was in his truck outside the Hayes Outdoor Adventures building at 1:45, the briefing document on the passenger seat, when his phone rang. "Victoria." "You're here," she said. "Parking lot." "Come up to the 4th floor. Conference room B." A pause. "Daniel." "Yeah. Thank you for doing this." "You keep thanking me for things that aren't done yet," he said. "Wait until after the call." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Just come upstairs." He went upstairs. Conference room B had a long table, a phone unit in the center, and 4 people already seated, Victoria at the head. Sandra Park to her left. CFO, mid-40s, sharp and efficient, in the way of someone who had been underestimated enough to stop explaining herself, and Victoria's attorney, a lean man named Graham Foster, who had the energy of someone permanently operating at 90% capacity. The 4th person was Eleanor Marsh on a video screen at the far end of the table, 77 years old, silver-haired, sitting in what appeared to be a very well-organized home office. Eleanor looked at Daniel when he walked in. Her expression did the same kind of scan Margaret's had done at the lake house door. "You're taller than I expected," she said. "Ma'am," he said. "Eleanor, sit down. We have 12 minutes before Robert Haynes joins, and I want to talk through the approach." He sat. Sandra slid him a copy of the call framework. He found the section marked Operational and read it in 90 seconds. Eleanor walked them through the strategy with the precision of someone who had been in rooms like this one for 50 years and had long since stopped being impressed by the rooms. The goal was to reframe the leak as a failed intelligence operation rather than a successful one to reach Robert Haynes before the bad information did establish a counter-narrative built on documented operational history and present the New Mexico acquisition as too solid to be destabilized by an anonymous tip. "Robert will want to know why he should believe us over the other source," Eleanor said. "He won't say that directly. He'll ask about operational reliability, timeline integrity, whether the infrastructure can support the acquisition's demands in the first 18 months. Victoria nodded. "Those are the operational questions." Eleanor's eyes went to Daniel. "Which is why he's in the room." Graham looked at Daniel, then at Victoria. "He's the maintenance supervisor. He's the reason the Telluride property stayed open during the worst mechanical failure this company has had in 15 years, Victoria said without looking at Graham. "He's the reason we didn't lose 2 investors in the same quarter. And he's the person who will answer Robert Haynes's operational questions because he knows the answers better than anyone else in this room." She looked at Graham now directly. "Is there a problem with that?" Graham looked at Daniel. Daniel looked back. "No," Graham said. "No problem." Robert Haynes joined the call at 2:01. He was in his 60s, deep voice, the particular economy of speech that came from decades of evaluating proposals and asking the questions that mattered, and not the ones that didn't. He greeted Eleanor with warmth and Victoria with respect, and then said very simply, "I received some information last week that I need to understand." "Tell me what you received," Victoria said. He did. It was worse than Daniel had expected, not more specific, but more strategic. Whoever had fed the information to Haynes hadn't just shared the acquisition file. They'd framed it as evidence that Victoria's company was financially overextended, that the New Mexico property was a defensive acquisition rather than a growth move, and that the operational infrastructure couldn't support a second major expansion in the same fiscal year. The financial overextension claim was false. Daniel knew that from the briefing document. The operational infrastructure claim was his. "Mr. Haynes," he said, and every head in the room turned slightly because this was the first time he'd spoken. "My name is Daniel Carter. I'm the Senior Operations Supervisor for Hayes Outdoor Adventures. I've been with the company 6 years." A beat on the line. "Go ahead, Mr. Carter," Haynes said. "The information you received about our operational capacity is inaccurate. I can tell you specifically why if you want the detail. Or I can tell you the summary, and you can ask for detail after." A brief pause. Summary first. Hayes Outdoor Adventures currently operates 4 resort properties across Colorado. Combined, those properties run at 93% operational efficiency across all seasons, which is 10 points above industry standard for mountain resort facilities. Our equipment maintenance cycle runs on a 24-month replacement schedule rather than the industry standard 36, which means our failure rate is lower and our response time when failures do occur is faster. He kept his voice even and factual. The Telluride property's mechanical failure 18 months ago was resolved in a 6-hour window at 2 in the morning before the resort opened for business. The New Mexico property would operate under the same systems, the same team, the same protocols. Silence on the line. "The source that fed you that information," Daniel continued, "had access to a preliminary file that presented operational figures without the context of our maintenance investment. It's a real file. The numbers in it are real, but taken without context, they create a picture that isn't accurate." A beat. "Which is exactly why someone chose to share that file and not the full operational report." Another silence. Longer this time. Then Robert Haynes said, "Eleanor, who is this man?" "Someone worth listening to," Eleanor said. "I'd like the full operational report," Haynes said. "Can you have it to me by end of business today?" Daniel looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at him. "Yes," she said. The call lasted another 22 minutes. Haynes asked 4 more questions. Daniel answered 2 of them. Sandra answered 1. Victoria answered the last. When Haynes signed off, he said, "Thursday's meeting is still on. I'll see you then, Victoria." The line went quiet. Graham Foster let out a long breath. Sandra made a note on her pad. Eleanor on the video screen closed the folder in front of her and looked at Daniel. "Well done," she said. "Clean, factual, no overreach. Well done." "Thank you, Eleanor." "Don't thank me. You did the work." She looked at Victoria. "He's good in a room." "I know," Victoria said. "Make sure you don't waste that," Eleanor said. And then, without apparent irony, she ended the video call. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Graham turned to Daniel and said in the voice of a man revising a position, "That was a very good answer about the operational figures. Thank you. Where did you learn to present like that?" "Budget reviews," Daniel said. "When your department doesn't have the loudest voice in the room, you learn to make every word count." Graham nodded slowly, like he was filing that somewhere useful. Sandra was already drafting the operational report email. Daniel stayed for another hour, pulling figures from memory and confirming them against documentation. Sandra retrieved from the company files. The report went to Haynes at 4:58. Victoria walked Daniel to the elevator at 5:15. They stood in the hallway outside conference room B, and the building was mostly empty at this hour, and the day had been a particular kind of long that leaves a person both depleted and oddly energized. "You were right," she said. "About what specifically?" "About Eleanor. About calling her first." She paused. "About the consortium call, needing you in the room." Graham wasn't sure about that last one. "Graham is reconsidering." "Good for Graham." She almost smiled. Then it shifted into something else. "Philip isn't going to stop," she said. Even with the document preservation notice, he'll find another angle. Maybe. He has resources, and he has patience, and he's had access to my world for 25 years. Her voice was steady, but the tension underneath it was audible. The way tension becomes audible in people who are very good at suppressing it, but have been doing it for too long. I've been handling people like him my whole career, but it's... She stopped. Exhausting, he said. She looked at him. Yes. Then stop handling it alone. She opened her mouth, closed it. I'm not saying stop handling it, he said. I'm saying stop handling it alone. He held her gaze. There's a difference. She searched his face. Thursday, she said. After the consortium meeting. What about Thursday? I want to take you and Lily to dinner. She said it carefully, like something she'd thought about the specific wording of. Not here, not downtown, somewhere quiet. Somewhere that doesn't have anything to do with any of this. She gestured a gesture that covered the building, the conference room, the call, all of it. Just the three of us. He thought about Lily's voice on Tuesday morning. You can like her. I'll ask her, he said. But I know what she'll say. What will she say? She'll want to go somewhere that has good macaroni and cheese, he said. She has opinions about macaroni and cheese. I have opinions about macaroni and cheese, Victoria said. Strong ones. I was raised by a woman who makes everything from scratch, she said. So yes. Then you two are going to get along fine, he said. She smiled. Not the controlled, managed smile of a CEO. The one he'd first seen in the kitchen of the lake house, the real one, the unguarded one, the one that transformed her face for 3 seconds and stayed in his memory for the rest of the day. He pushed the elevator button. The doors opened. Daniel, she said. He turned. I meant what I said Sunday night, at the window. She held his gaze. I want this to be real. It already is, he said. The doors closed. He rode down alone and walked out into the parking lot and sat in his truck for 30 seconds before he started the engine. Not because he needed to collect himself, because he wanted to stay inside the moment for a little longer before it became the past. Thursday came and broke everything open. The consortium meeting was at 10. Daniel was not in that room. This was Victoria's meeting, her deal, the culmination of 15 months of work, and she needed her attorney and her CFO and Eleanor Marsh on the video screen, not a maintenance supervisor. He understood that. He'd told her that on Wednesday evening when she'd mentioned the meeting time. You'll call me after, he said. The minute it's done, she said. He spent Thursday morning on an equipment inspection at the main Colorado Springs facility. His team was good. He'd built them carefully over 6 years, the way you build anything that has to hold under pressure. He trusted all 11 of them. He let them work. He signed off on reports, flagged 2 items for follow-up, and had his phone in his shirt pocket the whole morning. At 12:43 it rang. He answered before the second ring. It's done, Victoria said. Tell me. We closed. Robert Haynes signed the letter of intent. Full terms, our position, our timeline. Her voice was controlled, but underneath it something was wide open. The way a window sounds different when it's actually open versus when you just think it is. Eleanor is already calling it the cleanest acquisition negotiation she's seen in 5 years. It was, he said. You were prepared. We were prepared, she corrected. He let that stand. Dinner tonight is still on, she said. Lily picked the place this morning. She has conditions. About the macaroni. About the macaroni and also about whether they have crayons, and also about whether you are willing to learn about the Cretaceous period. A short, real laugh. Tell her yes on all counts. She'll hold you to it. Good. He hung up and stood in the middle of the equipment bay with his phone in his hand, and 3 of his team members were looking at him from a polite distance with the particular expression of people who have just watched their supervisor receive what was obviously good news and are waiting to see if it will affect them. Good news, he confirmed. They went back to work. He stared at the phone for another second. Then his phone buzzed again. Different number. He looked at the screen. I didn't recognize it. But the area code was local, and something about the timing 20 seconds after hanging up with Victoria made him answer. "Carter," he said. "Mr. Carter." Male voice. Measured professional. "My name is James Whitfield. I'm an attorney. I represent Philip Garrett." The equipment bay was loud around him. He walked toward the exit, pushed through the side door into the relative quiet of the outer yard. "Go ahead," he said. "My client has become aware that certain allegations have been made regarding his conduct at a private property in San Isabel County last weekend. He has also become aware that you were present during the event in question and have represented yourself in certain professional contexts in a capacity that may exceed your employment role at Hayes Outdoor Adventures." Daniel stood very still. "What specifically is your client claiming?" he said. "Mr. Garrett has documents suggesting that your involvement in the Hayes Outdoor Adventures New Mexico acquisition was conducted without proper authorization from the board of directors. He also has documentation suggesting that your personal relationship with Ms. Hayes constitutes a conflict of interest that may have influenced the consortium negotiation." "Your client doesn't have documentation," Daniel said. "He has a photograph he deleted off his phone at 6 in the morning at gunpoint of his own conscience." A brief pause. "I'm not sure what you're referring to. Your client came to a private family gathering, accessed documents from a private study without authorization, photographed them, and then deleted the photograph when confronted." Daniel kept his voice flat and precise. "Whatever he has, he obtained it before that moment, which means he had access to Victoria Hayes's proprietary files through a source that wasn't that study." He paused. "And that is a much more interesting problem than whether I was in a conference room on Tuesday." Silence. "My client simply wants—" "Your client wants leverage," Daniel said. "And he's calling me because he thinks I'm the softer target." He watched a maintenance truck pull out of the far end of the yard. "Tell your client that the document preservation notice from Graham Foster's office is already on file. Tell him that the consortium deal closed this morning. And tell him that if he has a legitimate business grievance, he should submit it in writing to Victoria Hayes's attorney." A pause. "And Mr. Whitfield, if you call this number again, I'm going to suggest that Victoria's legal team make your client's source question the center of a very uncomfortable conversation." He hung up. He stood in the yard. His heart was doing something louder than usual, which he acknowledged and then set aside, because the heart was allowed to be loud, but that didn't mean it got to run things. He called Victoria. She answered in 2 rings. "What's wrong?" "Nothing catastrophic. I need you to call Graham in the next 10 minutes. He told her about Whitfield's call briefly and exactly without editorializing. When he finished, she was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "He's escalating." "Yes. Because the consortium deal closed and he's lost the business angle. So now he needs a different one." Another pause. "The conflict of interest claim." "Which is only a claim if the board doesn't already know I was involved in Tuesday's call," Daniel said. "Does the board know?" Sandra copied the consortium call summary to the full board this morning as standard procedure. A beat. "Which means the board knows exactly what your involvement was, what role you played, and that the deal closed successfully." "Then there's no conflict of interest claim," he said. "There's just a man who came to a lake house, tried to photograph files he had no right to, and is now trying to manufacture a position." "Graham will handle it," she said. "I know." "Daniel." Her voice shifted slightly. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "I'm fine, Victoria." He meant it. "Call Graham." She called Graham. Graham sent a response to Whitfield's firm by 3 o'clock that was by Graham's own description when he briefed Victoria afterward, the kind of letter that makes attorneys reconsider their client relationships. Daniel didn't see the letter. He didn't need to. He picked up Lily from the after-school program at 3:45. She came out carrying a drawing, a large, ambitious rendering of what she informed him was a Parasaurolophus, which was different from last week's Brachiosaurus because it had a crest and lived in a different period entirely. "Can I bring this tonight?" she asked. "To dinner." "To show her." She held it up, studied it critically. "I want to see if she can tell which period it's from." Lily. "It's a test," she said. "Not a mean one, just to see." "A test," he repeated. If she gets it wrong, I'll still tell her, she said generously. He put the truck in drive. Put your seatbelt on. They met Victoria at 6:30 at a restaurant that Lily had selected based on criteria Daniel had been given in writing. Yes, this happened on a post-it note that morning. Macaroni and cheese crayons, no menu. That was too fancy to read. The place she'd chosen was a family-owned Italian spot, 20 minutes from their house, the kind that had red checkered tablecloths and bread that came immediately, and a noise level that made it comfortable for an 8-year-old to be exactly as loud as she needed to be. Victoria was already there when they arrived. She was at a corner table out of the main traffic, and she stood when she saw them come in. She was wearing a dark green sweater, and her hair was down the same way it had been at the lake house dock, and she looked different from the CEO of anything, which Daniel suspected was on purpose. Lily stopped 3 feet inside the door. She looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at her. "Hi," Lily said. "Hi," Victoria said. "I'm Lily. I know. Your dad talks about you." Lily considered this. Good things or bad things? Almost entirely good things. What's the bad thing? That you argue about how many dinosaur documentaries count as one episode. Lily turned and looked at Daniel with an expression that said she had filed this information and would be returning to it later. Then she turned back to Victoria and held up the drawing. "Can you tell which period this is from?" Victoria leaned forward and looked at it seriously. "Cretaceous," she said. "Based on the crest structure." Lily's mouth opened, closed. "My mother made me read every field guide in her library when I was your age," Victoria said. "She thought bored children should have specific information to be bored about." Lily looked at the drawing, then at Victoria, then at Daniel with an expression he recognized, the expression of someone revising a position significantly upward. "She can sit with us," Lily announced, and walked to the table. Daniel and Victoria exchanged a look over her head. "High praise," he said quietly. "I'll take it," she said. They sat down. Lily ordered the macaroni and cheese, and then spent 20 minutes telling Victoria about the Parasaurolophus, with the focused intensity she reserved for subjects she considered genuinely important. Victoria listened with full attention, asked questions that were real, and at one point said something about herding behavior in hadrosaurs that made Lily go completely still, and then say in a voice of total reverence, "How do you know that?" "I had a field guide," Victoria said. "Can I borrow it?" "It's at my house, but yes." "When?" "Lily," Daniel said. "I'm just asking when," Lily said. Victoria smiled. "Soon," she said. Lily accepted this the way she accepted all promises made directly and without hesitation as a contract. The macaroni arrived. Lily ate half of it, declared it in the top 3, and started coloring on the paper placemat with the crayons the restaurant had provided, which freed the table for something more than dinosaur chronology. Victoria turned her water glass slowly. "Graham called," she said. "I heard. Philip withdrew through Whitfield this afternoon. The board received a formal notification. It's over." She kept her voice level, the way she kept things level when she was delivering information she had significant feelings about. "Graham thinks he'll try to root something through the consortium in 6 months. But Haynes is solidly in our corner now, and Eleanor made 3 calls this afternoon that effectively closed the doors Philip might have used." "Eleanor is efficient," Daniel said. "Eleanor is an institution," Victoria said. "She called me after, said," she paused. Something moved across her face. "She said my grandmother would have liked you." Daniel looked up. "She knew your grandmother. Eleanor and my grandmother were friends for 40 years. I didn't know that until today." Victoria looked at her water glass. "She said my grandmother always believed the ring would know when it was right." A pause. "Eleanor has apparently believed in the ring's judgment for some time." "So the ring had references," Daniel said. Victoria looked at him, and then she laughed. The real one, the full one, the one that had been living in his memory since the kitchen of the lake house, and across the table, Lily looked up from her coloring and said, "What's funny?" "A ring," Victoria said. "Rings aren't usually funny," Lily said seriously. "This one is a little unusual," Victoria said. Lily looked at Daniel. "Do you have a funny ring?" "Not anymore," he said. Lily absorbed this and returned to the placemat. Okay, she said, the way 8-year-olds say okay when they don't have the full picture but are choosing to trust the adults with it. Daniel looked at Victoria across the table. She was looking at him already. There was something between them that had been building since a dock in the mountains, and a question about resort inspections, and a phone call. He almost didn't answer, something that had survived a storm and a family weekend, and a man in a luxury sedan on a gravel road, and an attorney's phone call in a maintenance yard. Something that had been tested incrementally by every version of ordinary crisis that life produces, and had not collapsed under any of it. I'm not going back to invisible, he said. She tilted her head slightly. What? 3 years, he said. I've been invisible, by choice. It worked for what it needed to do. But I'm done with it. He held her gaze. Whatever this is, I'm not doing it quietly. I'm not calling it a favor or an arrangement or a situation. I'm not showing up halfway. She looked at him steadily. What are you showing up as? She said. Someone who sees you, he said simply. If that's enough. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she reached across the table. Not dramatically, just put her hand on the table, palm down, in the space between their water glasses. He put his hand over hers. Lily looked up from the placemat, looked at their hands, looked at Daniel, looked at Victoria. Are you going to be around more? She asked Victoria. I'd like to be, Victoria said. Lily considered this. Do you know how to play rummy? I do. Dad never shuffles correctly. I can show him, Victoria said. Okay, Lily said, and went back to the drawing. Daniel looked at their hands on the table. I thought about a ring that had been in a nightstand for 12 years, waiting for someone to look at a woman the right way. He thought about a drive to a lake house that he almost didn't take. He thought about a blizzard in January and a gearbox at 2 in the morning, and a woman who had found out 3 months late that something real had happened and hadn't known how to say it correctly. He thought about Lily's voice. You can like her. He thought about Margaret's voice. That look. I thought about a loon calling on a dark lake and a fire burning to coals, and 4 words said simply, at a window. Before the speaker walked away, I don't think this is pretend anymore. He had not been a man who believed in accidents. He had been a man who believed in systems and maintenance and response time and the quiet, unglamorous work of keeping things running. He had believed that things broke and someone had to know how to fix them, and that the fixing was its own kind of meaning. He still believed all of that. He just no longer believed it was the whole story. Outside the restaurant after dinner, after Lily had made Victoria promise 3 specific things and extracted her phone number with the efficiency of a contract negotiator after the check was paid and the crayons returned. They stood in the parking lot in the particular way of people who are not ready to leave yet. Lily was at the truck examining something on the side panel she had apparently just noticed. Her attention was for approximately 90 seconds elsewhere. Daniel looked at Victoria. She looked at him. Thank you, he said, for a fake weekend that turned real. Thank you, she said, for showing up to something you didn't have to. I had to, he said. I just didn't know it yet. She reached into her jacket pocket. She held out her hand. In her palm sat the ring. Her grandmother's ring. The one he'd given back on Sunday night at the lake house window. The one she'd closed her fist around and said, only, okay, but meant something much larger than that. He looked at it. Then at her. I'm not giving it back, she said. I'm just letting you see it. She curled her fingers back over it. When the time is right, I'll know what to do with it. She held his gaze. And so will you. He nodded. Lily called from the truck. Dad, there's a scratch on the door. That scratch has been there 2 years, Bug. I think it's getting bigger. It's not getting bigger. You should look. He looked at Victoria. Victoria was already smiling. Go look at the scratch, she said. I went and looked at the scratch, which had not changed in 2 years and was not getting bigger, and Lily showed him exactly where it was with the authority of someone presenting evidence, and he nodded seriously, and when he looked back toward the restaurant entrance, Victoria was watching them with an expression that had no professional component in it whatsoever. Just a woman standing in a parking lot, watching a man and his daughter argue gently about a scratch on a truck door. Looking for the first time in a very long time, like she was exactly where she wanted to be. 3 weeks after the restaurant, Lily started leaving her dinosaur drawings on the kitchen counter addressed to Victoria. Not to Daniel. To Victoria. Specific drawings labeled in Lily's careful, oversized handwriting. This one is for Victoria, because she will understand the crest situation, and Daniel would find them in the morning next to his coffee cup, like small dispatches from a child who had made a private decision about the future and was simply executing it. He photographed them and sent them to Victoria. Every one. Victoria's replies were never short. She responded to each drawing with the seriousness it deserved: specific observations, follow-up questions. Once a photograph of a page from a field guide she'd found in Margaret's storage, showing a near-identical Parasaurolophus sketch from 1987. Lily had held that photograph for a full minute without speaking, which in 8-year-old terms was approximately equivalent to a standing ovation. The thing between them grew the way real things grow. Not fast, not dramatic. The way a tree grows by doing the daily invisible work, until one morning you look at it and realize it is much larger than it was, and you cannot identify the day it changed because it changed on all the days. Victoria came to dinner at their house twice in October. Not elaborate dinners the first time. Daniel made pasta and Lily provided a 12-minute educational presentation about hadrosaur migration patterns that Victoria survived with complete attention and real questions. The second time, Lily insisted on teaching Victoria to play rummy, which required explaining the rules, re-explaining the rules, and then explaining why Lily's interpretation of the rules was the correct one, despite being structurally different from every other known interpretation. Victoria won 3 hands anyway. Lily accused her of using the field guide knowledge to cheat, which made no logical sense, but which Victoria accepted as a valid critique. Daniel watched them at the kitchen table after that second dinner. His daughter and the woman who had pulled herself off a dock in the mountains and into his life, and felt something settle in his chest so completely and finally that it was almost disorienting. Like a piece of machinery that had been running slightly misaligned for 3 years and had just clicked into true. In November, the Hayes Outdoor Adventures Board voted on a structural change. Victoria had been working on it quietly since October. Daniel knew the broad shape of it. She'd mentioned it once without detail in the way she mentioned things she was still building toward, but the specifics arrived the same way. Everything arrived in this company as a memo in the internal system at 7 in the morning, which he read in his truck before going into the facility. The memo created a new position: Director of Operations, reporting directly to the CEO. Responsibilities included oversight of all 4 resort properties, infrastructure strategy team development, and participation in acquisition evaluation processes. The salary listed at the bottom made him read it twice. He sat in his truck for a long time. Then he went inside and found Sandra Park in her office. "You read the memo," Sandra said without looking up from her screen. "I did. She wrote it herself," Sandra said. "Wouldn't let legal draft it. Spent 3 nights on it." Now she looked up. "She told the board your involvement in the Haynes call was the deciding factor in the consortium deal. She presented the Telluride documentation, the 6-year operational record." She held his gaze. "The board approved the position without a single no vote." He stood in her doorway. "Does she know I've seen the memo?" he said. "She sent it to the whole company, Daniel." "Right." He straightened. "Right." He went back to his team, ran the morning inspection, signed off on 2 maintenance logs, fixed a ventilation issue on the 2nd floor that had been on the minor issues list for 2 weeks, and that he handled himself because it was faster. At 11:15, Victoria appeared in the equipment bay. She was in her full CEO presentation blazer portfolio, the controlled composure that meant she'd been in meetings since 8, and she walked through the equipment bay like a woman who had made a decision and was not uncertain about it, but was uncertain about the conversation, which was a distinction Daniel had learned to read. His team noticed her immediately and found reasons to be elsewhere with impressive collective speed. She stopped 3 feet from him. He looked at her. "You read the memo," she said. "At 7 this morning. And..." He looked at her steadily. Why didn't you tell me it was coming? Because I needed the board to vote on the position before I told you about it, she said. If I'd told you first, you would have told me not to do it. I might have, he agreed, which is why I didn't tell you first. She held his gaze. This is not personal, Daniel. The board reviewed 6 years of operational documentation. The Telluride incident alone was enough to make the case. The Haynes call confirmed it. She paused. This position should have existed 2 years ago. The fact that it didn't is a failure I'm correcting. And the fact that you and I are, is something I disclosed fully to the board, she said. In writing, before the vote. He stopped. You disclosed it. Conflict of interest documentation, full transparency. Her voice was completely even. I told them exactly what the situation was. I told them the position was being created on merit and that my personal relationship with the candidate was being disclosed in compliance with company policy. She paused. The board's response was that a CEO who discloses proactively has better judgment than one who waits to be asked. He stared at her. You disclosed it, he said again. I did. To the full board. Yes. Before the vote. Daniel. She tilted her head slightly. Are you going to repeat everything I said, or are you going to answer the question? He looked at the equipment around them. The tools he knew by weight. The systems he could operate in the dark. The bay he had walked into 6 years ago as a man who had lost everything that wasn't his daughter and had quietly, deliberately built something worth keeping out of what was left. What's the question? He said. Will you take the position? A beat. Say yes or no, she said. Don't protect me from the answer. He looked at her. Yes, he said. Something in her face loosened. Not dramatically. Just the small specific release of something that had been held tightly. Good, she said. You could have asked me. I know. Instead of a company-wide memo. The memo was efficient, she said. Victoria, I was nervous, she said. And the simplicity of it, the direct, undefended admission, was so unlike the managed version of her that he felt it like a gear shift. I was afraid you would say the position changed things between us. That it complicated it. That you'd rather stay where you were than... She stopped. I was afraid you'd choose invisible again. He looked at her for a long moment. I told you 3 weeks ago, he said quietly. I'm done with invisible. She nodded once. The tight nod of someone accepting something they want very much to believe. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. She turned to leave, stopped, turned back. Lily called me last night, she said. He blinked. She what? From your phone. While you were in the shower, apparently. Victoria's expression was doing something complicated. She wanted to know if I was coming to her school's Thanksgiving thing. Next week. Lily called you. She said she needed a straight answer because you give vague answers when you don't want to commit to a timeline. He pressed one hand flat against the side of a storage cabinet. She's not wrong, Victoria said. I know she's not wrong. Are you angry? He looked at the ceiling briefly. No. I'm no. He exhaled. What did you tell her? I said yes. A pause. I cleared my Thursday afternoon calendar. He looked at her. She said to bring the field guide, Victoria added. I thought about Lily at 9:30 last night, calculating the exact moment between his shower and bedtime when she had maximum unsupervised access to his phone and minimum adult interference with her agenda. I'm going to have a conversation with her about phone etiquette, he said. You can try, Victoria said, and walked out of the equipment bay with something that was absolutely a smile even from the back. Thanksgiving week arrived, and with it, the kind of cold that settles into Colorado early and stays, and Daniel's team spent Monday and Tuesday winterizing the outdoor infrastructure at the main facility with the focused efficiency of people who had done this enough times to have a system. He worked alongside them, the way he always had, the way he intended to keep doing, regardless of what the new title said. The work hadn't changed. The responsibility had grown. That was the right kind of change. Wednesday evening, Janet called. I heard about the promotion, she said. Memo went company-wide. Daniel. Her voice had the particular tone it got when she was working up to something. Are you happy? How was in the kitchen? Lily was at the table doing homework. The radio was on low. It smelled like the soup he'd put on an hour ago. Yes, he said. Actually happy. Not fine. Not managing. Happy. He looked at Lily, who was arguing with her math worksheet in a low, persistent undertone. He thought about a parking lot and a ring in a palm and two hands on a table and the way Victoria had looked at them without any professional surface at all. Yes, he said again. Actually. Janet was quiet for a second. Then she said, Good, it's about time. And then, bring her to Christmas. Janet. I'm not asking, I'm telling you. Bring her and bring Lily and come to Christmas. My house. I'll make the thing you like. The turkey thing. The turkey thing, yes. I'll ask her. She'll say yes, Janet said with complete confidence and hung up. He looked at the phone. Then he looked at Lily, who had looked up from the worksheet during the call, and was now watching him with the expression of someone who had heard every word and was processing the implications. Was that Aunt Janet? Lily said. Yes. Are we going to Christmas? I have to ask Victoria. She'll say yes, Lily said, and went back to the worksheet. He stood in the kitchen between his daughter and the soup and the radio, and thought about how a life rebuilt from grief looked exactly like this when it was working. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just ordinary evenings that felt like something rather than nothing. Thursday was the school Thanksgiving event. It was the kind of school function that parents either dread or have learned to approach with tactical acceptance. Folding chairs, construction, paper decorations, children performing a song that existed primarily to make adults feel things. Daniel had been to 3 of them. He had the folding chair methodology down. He arrived at 2:15. Victoria was already there. She was standing near the back wall, slightly apart from the cluster of parents who all knew each other's names and had their own established geography of the room. She was in a coat and a scarf and had the field guide under one arm, and she was looking at the paper decorations on the wall with genuine interest, which told him she wasn't performing patience. She was actually curious. He came up beside her. You found it, he said. Lily sent me a map, she said. She sent you a map of the school. A hand-drawn one. It was detailed. She glanced at him. There was a star on this wall. I followed the star. He looked at the wall. Why this wall? Best view of the stage. She glanced sideways at him. Her words. He shook his head slowly. She's been planning this, he said. Since the restaurant, Victoria said. Possibly before. She's 8. She's 8 and she knows what she wants, Victoria said. That's not a small thing. A teacher came to the microphone. The folding chairs filled. Daniel and Victoria found 2 near the back. Lily's map had in fact identified the optimal location and settled in with the collective acceptance of people who have handed their next 45 minutes to elementary school programming. The children came out in the specific shuffling formation of a class that has rehearsed this, but not quite enough. Lily was in the 3rd row. She found Daniel immediately. She always found him immediately, the same way she could find his truck in any parking lot, some internal GPS calibrated specifically to him. Then she found Victoria, and the look on her face, that quick, uncomplicated 8-year-old joy at seeing a plan execute correctly hit Daniel somewhere, so fundamental that he stopped preparing his expression and just let it land. Victoria saw it too. He felt her go still beside him for 1 second. Then she lifted her hand slightly in a small wave. Lily's smile went full. The performance began. It was 45 minutes of the particular joy that lives in children who are not yet self-conscious, the ones who sing with full commitment and forget the words without distress and look at their parents from the stage with a directness that asks, Are you seeing this? I am doing this. Are you seeing it? Daniel was seeing it. He was also for the first time at one of these events not seeing it alone. Afterward, Lily found them in the hallway with the speed of a child who had somewhere to be. She grabbed Victoria's hand without preamble and said, "Come see my project," and pulled her toward the classroom display boards before Victoria could respond. Daniel followed at a slight distance. He watched Lily explain her project, a poster about hadrosaur social structures that was significantly more sophisticated than the assignment parameters had required because Lily Carter did not operate within assignment parameters when she had opinions about the subject matter. Victoria read every word of the poster, asked 2 questions, made one observation about the social behavior section that made Lily's eyes go wide. And then Lily said, "You should come to Christmas." Victoria looked up, found Daniel over Lily's head. He raised both hands slightly. This was not his operation. Victoria looked back at Lily. "Your dad would have to invite me," she said carefully. "He will," Lily said. "He's just slow about things. You have to decide first, and then he'll figure it out." Victoria looked at him again. He shrugged. She wasn't wrong. "Then yes," Victoria said. "I would like to come to Christmas." "Good," Lily said, and moved on to explaining the migration behavior section with the energy of someone who had completed a task and was now free to focus on the next objective. Daniel came to stand beside Victoria. "I was going to ask you," he said. "I know. This weekend. I know." She got there first. "She usually will," Victoria said. She was watching Lily explain the migration routes on the poster with focused, specific gestures, the way she explained everything that mattered to her. "That's not a problem. That's just who she is." He looked at Lily, then at Victoria. "How are you doing?" he said. Not about the project, not about Christmas. Just the question. She thought about it for a real second. Not the managed, reflexive answer. The actual one. "Better than I've been in a long time," she said, "and still figuring out what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it," he said. Same answer as before. She looked at him. "You've said that to me twice now," she said. "I'll keep saying it until it sticks." Something moved through her eyes. "I'm not good at letting things be easy," she said. "I know. I find the complication. I've noticed. It's a habit, built over a long time." She was looking at Lily's poster, but she wasn't seeing it. "When things are good, I start looking for what's about to go wrong, because in my experience, something always does." "Something always does," he agreed. She looked at him. "That's not comforting." "I'm not trying to tell you nothing will go wrong," he said. "I'm saying when it does, you won't be handling it alone." He held her gaze. "That's the difference. Not that life gets easier, that you stop being alone in it." She was very still. Lily turned around and said, "Are you listening to this part? The migration part is the most important." And they both looked at the poster and said yes at the same time, which made Lily suspicious, but satisfied. December came in fast. The Director of Operations transition was structured over 60 days, giving Daniel time to bring his team to full independence and develop the 2 supervisors who would split his former responsibilities. He approached it the way he approached every maintenance handover, methodically, completely, without cutting corners. His team deserved a real transition. He gave them one. The work changed in texture, but not in nature. He was in more rooms now, longer conversations, more context on the company's strategic direction than he'd ever had before. He found he was good at it in ways he hadn't fully anticipated, not just the operational architecture which he knew cold, but the translation work. Turning technical realities into language that made sense to investors. Turning financial constraints into operational solutions. Building the bridge between what a company needed to do and what it was actually physically capable of doing. Victoria said once, after a board presentation, he'd contributed a section to, "You explain things the way they need to be explained." Simple language, he said. Not simple, honest. She paused. "There's a difference." He thought about that for a while. I thought about 6 years of budget reviews, of being the person in the room whose title meant people heard him last, of learning to make every word count because he didn't have the luxury of making them not count. Of all the ways invisibility had quietly and without his full awareness been sharpening him into someone useful, I thought about Sarah. He thought about her the way he always did, not with the raw structural grief of the first year, not with the careful distance of the second, but with something that had found its shape. Real loss. Real presence. The way someone can be gone and still be part of how you became who you are. She would have liked Victoria. That was not a complicated thought. It was just a true one. She would have sat across from Victoria at dinner and asked pointed questions and made her laugh, and then said to Daniel afterward, "She's serious about the right things. That's rare." He carried that thought like the photograph in his shirt pocket. Not as weight. As something that had found its right place. 2 weeks before Christmas, Eleanor Marsh came to Colorado. Victoria had mentioned she was visiting something about reviewing the Q4 reports in person, which Eleanor still preferred to do, and which Victoria found deeply endearing, even when it was logistically complicated. Daniel hadn't expected to be part of it. Victoria called him at 9 in the morning. "Eleanor wants to have lunch with us. Both of us. Both of us. Today, 12:30. She picked the place." He rearranged his afternoon schedule and met them at a restaurant he had not previously been to, which turned out to be the kind of place that existed in every city and that nobody talked about publicly because the people who knew about it preferred to keep it quiet. Small. Real. The food was the kind that made you stop talking. Eleanor was already seated when they arrived. She looked at Daniel with the same assessing scan she'd given him on the video screen in October, except in person, it was more precise. The way things are always more precise when the distance is removed. "Sit down," she said. "Both of you." They sat. Eleanor looked at them across the table for a moment. "You're good together," she said. "I can see it now in person. Couldn't fully see it on a screen." "Eleanor," Victoria said, "I'm not being sentimental, I'm being observational." Eleanor picked up her menu. "I've known Victoria since she was 24, and I have watched her operate in every kind of situation. She is a different person when she is not compensating for something." She looked at Daniel. "You reduce the compensating." He thought about that. "I don't do anything specific." "That's exactly right," Eleanor said. "You don't do anything specific. You just don't require the performance." She opened the menu. "That is rarer than it sounds." Lunch was 1 hour and 40 minutes. Eleanor asked him about the operations transition, about the New Mexico property's infrastructure needs, about his assessment of the company's weakest operational link. She asked the questions of someone who had been reading quarterly reports for 7 years and wanted to hear the answers in person from the source without any intermediary. He answered directly. Every time. At the end of lunch, Eleanor set down her coffee cup and said, "I want to tell you something about the ring." Victoria went still. Daniel waited. Margaret's mother, Victoria's grandmother. "Clara gave Margaret that ring in 1972, Eleanor said. "I was there." Clara had been widowed 2 years earlier, and she had spent those 2 years watching Margaret try to protect herself from more loss by keeping people at a distance. She paused. She gave Margaret the ring and told her to give it to someone who made her believe the distance wasn't necessary anymore. The table was quiet. "Margaret waited 30 years to give that ring to the right person," Eleanor said. "She gave it to Victoria's father in 2002. He passed away in 2011. She looked at Daniel steadily. "And then Margaret waited another 12 years. "Until the lake house," Daniel said. "Until she watched you at dinner," Eleanor said. "Until the adjacent comment." A small pause. "She called me that night, from the lake house. Said she'd seen the look." He thought about Margaret at the kitchen table at 7 in the morning, coffee in hand, satisfied. People who are pretending don't usually do that. "She wasn't wrong," he said. "She never is." Eleanor agreed. Infuriating quality in a person. She picked up her coffee again. "I tell you this because I want you to understand what you're carrying. Not the ring itself. The history behind it." She looked between them. "It's not about jewelry. It's about a family that learned over 3 generations to recognize when someone sees you clearly." Neither of them spoke. "Clara would have liked you," Eleanor told Daniel. Something shifted in his chest. He thought about the photograph in his shirt pocket. The woman in the garden laughing at something off camera. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," Eleanor said. "Be worth it. That's all anyone can do." She picked up her menu again. "Now, do either of you want dessert, or are we doing the thing where people skip dessert and regret it later?" Victoria looked at Daniel. "Dessert," he said. "Good man," Eleanor said, and waved for the server. Christmas was at Janet's house. The turkey thing was better than Daniel remembered, which Janet accepted as her due. Marcus and Diane came. Margaret had told Marcus about dinner at the restaurant, and Marcus had sent Daniel a text 2 weeks later that just said good with no other context, and Daniel had replied, "Yeah," and that had been the entire conversation. Rosemary could not make it, but sent a card addressed to Lily specifically, which contained a $20 bill and a note that said, "Buy a field guide, the good kind, not the children's version." Lily framed the note. Victoria arrived at Janet's house carrying a dish Margaret had taught her to make over the phone, a specific sweet potato preparation that took 90 minutes and that Janet declared after one bite to be a genuine threat to her reputation as the family cook. "I'll give you the recipe," Victoria said. "I don't want the recipe," Janet said. "I want you to make it every Christmas." Victoria looked at Daniel. He shrugged. "Janet usually gets what she wants." "I see where Lily gets it," Victoria said. "I am not like Lily," Janet said. "You really are," Daniel said. After dinner, after the dishes, after the kids had exhausted themselves, and Victoria had spent 40 minutes in a rummy game with Lily that ended in a disputed ruling that required Daniel as arbitrator, after Janet had pulled Daniel into the kitchen under the guise of putting away leftovers and said simply, "She's good. She's really good, Daniel." The evening wound into its natural last hour, and people settled into the warm, unguarded state of a Christmas that had gone well. Lily fell asleep on the couch under Janet's quilt with her new field guide. The real one, not the children's version ordered by Daniel, based on Rosemary's specific instruction, open on her chest. Janet and her husband drifted to the other room. Daniel and Victoria were at the kitchen table with the last of the coffee and the comfortable quiet that had become their specific thing. The quiet that required no management, no performance, no filling. She had her hands around her mug. He had the photograph in his shirt pocket. He had carried it there for 2 months. He reached in and put it on the table between them. She looked at it. The woman in the garden, laughing. The ring on her finger. "Eleanor gave me more context," he said. "I know. She told me what she said at lunch." "Then you know what I've been thinking about." She looked at the photograph, then at him. "What have you been thinking about?" she said. "That 3 generations of women in your family learned to recognize something," he said. "And that a ring sat in a nightstand for 12 years waiting. And that Margaret saw something at a dinner table and made a call at 6 in the morning to Eleanor." He kept his voice quiet even. "And that all of that happened before either of us admitted what this was." She looked at him steadily. "It was already decided," she said softly. "Before we knew." "Maybe," he said, "but I want to decide it myself." He reached into his jacket pocket. He had bought the ring 6 days ago. Not a family heirloom. Not a symbol of wealth. A simple ring, white gold, no unnecessary complexity chosen, because when he saw it, he thought immediately of her, of the directness and the clarity and the absence of pretension that he had come to understand as the core of who she was underneath every professional surface. He put it on the table next to the photograph. Victoria looked at it. She did not move. He gave her a full 10 seconds. Then he said, "You told me at the lake house that you wanted this to be real. I'm asking if you still do." She looked from the ring to him. "I have an 8-year-old daughter," he said. "I have work boots and a truck with a scratch on the door and opinions about maintenance schedules and absolutely no ability to pretend I'm something I'm not." "I know," she said. "And you are—" He paused. "You are the most capable person I have ever worked for or with. You built something remarkable. You carry it completely. And you have spent most of your adult life believing that what you carry was more than people could stay for." Her jaw moved, just slightly. "It's not," he said. "Not for me." The kitchen was quiet. Lily breathed steadily in the next room. Victoria looked at the ring. Then she looked at him. And what was on her face in the full, unmanaged, professionally unprotected version of her face was not the performance of someone responding to a moment. It was the recognition of someone arriving finally exactly where she had been trying to get to without knowing the address. "Yes," she said, "just that. But it carried everything it needed to carry." He picked up the ring and slid it onto her finger. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at the photograph of Clara in the garden, laughing at something off camera with that ring on her hand and that particular joy of someone who has just stopped being careful. "She knew," Victoria said. "3 generations knew," he said. She turned her hand and looked at the ring the way a person looks at something they have been waiting a long time to see in its right place. From the next room, there was the soft sound of a quilt shifting, and then Lily's voice, sleep-thickened, unhurried, 8 years old, and completely certain, said, "Did she say yes?" Daniel looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Daniel. "She said yes," Daniel called. A pause. Then, "Good. I already told Mrs. Patterson at school." He dropped his head. Victoria made the sound that was her real laugh, the one from the kitchen at the lake house, the unguarded full version, and it filled the room completely. He raised his head. She was still laughing, her hand with the new ring pressed against her mouth, her eyes bright, sitting at his sister's kitchen table on Christmas, in the ordinary, specific, irreplaceable life they had somehow improbably built out of a fake invitation and an unexpected ring and a dock in the mountains, and the simple radical decision to stop being invisible and start being seen. He had spent 3 years keeping things simple. He had been wrong about what simple meant. Simple was not small. Simple was not invisible. Simple was not the absence of complication or love or the terrifying necessary work of letting another person know you completely. Simple was this: a kitchen table, a sleeping daughter, a woman with his ring on her finger and her real laugh still in the room, a photograph of someone's grandmother who had known 60 years before any of them did exactly how it would feel when it was finally right. It felt like this, and this Daniel Carter understood at last was more than enough. It was everything.